evening and welcome to the Wednesday, March 26, 2014 meeting of the Falmouth Conservation Commission. First item on the agenda are to vote minutes. February 19th.
Madam Chairman, I've read the minutes for February 19th. Find them substantially correct. There are a couple typos which I've passed along to get corrected.
Okay, and I have a couple of typos too,
Well, we
which I'll
put
get
them
to
all in.
Susan.
They're pure typographical errors as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Me too. So would you like to make a motion?
I'd make a motion to accept the minutes of February 19th as corrected.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor of the minutes of February 19th, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Would you please pass that over to Jen? Okay, minutes of February 26th.
Motion to accept the minutes?
Of the 26th?
No.
I thought those were the minutes that
The-
were
what's
missing
the ones-
page 3.
No, those were in the 19th. She just puts the dates on there right now. We're working on getting them.
We've never seen the minutes of the 19th before this week. They were not the ones that were missing page 3.
Right.
But at any rate, we won't vote the 26th till we be,
The 12th was the one you were missing in page 3. My mistake, the 19th,
all right. So let's vote the 12th.
well, you don't, the 12th.
You gave us,
Madam Chairman, February, I don't know which page 3 is missing. I'll go over it right now. You don't have the minutes for the 26th, I know that.
Or the 19th,
we just did the minutes for the 19th.
March.
March 19th.
We're not talking about,
Madam Chair, do we have the minutes of March 12th?
we don't have the minutes of the 12th or the
Or the
19th.
Or the February.
So we voted
26th.
everything that we can right now.
All right.
Confusion
business.
reigns.
Just let them go with it.
Little Pond Oyster Demonstration Project, presentation by Sia, but to be introduced by the chairman of the Water Quality Committee, Eric Turkington. Good evening, Eric.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. With me tonight from the committee, we have Virginia Valiella and John Waterbury. And about a year ago, we came before this committee with a proposal to put 1 million oysters in a little pond and to measure as accurately as scientifically can be done the effect that that would have on the reduction of nitrogen in those waters. We're here a year later to report on the results of that experiment. And I'll give you a sneak preview. It has been a spectacularly successful effort, not only for the oysters, but for the scientific evaluation that has taken place. I think it's a landmark. It certainly is more study than has been done anywhere else in the Commonwealth on this topic, and the results are going to be useful not only for this town, but for every town on the Cape that is facing the nitrogen impact on their estuaries. Sia Karplus has done an amazing amount of work on this. She has been out there putting bags together. She's been out there putting these shellfish into their winter hole. There is not one part of this project that Sia has not had her hands on and her feet in the water for. So she'll give you the science, but she can also give you the hands-on impact of this project. Brian House, who gave us all the scientific information back to 1986, and has recently produced the numbers for this past year, and so we have a most amazing compilation of data, more than any other study, as I say, ever done on this subject. He's here to answer questions. Sia's here to show you what we did.
Okay, before you go, Eric, though, I will remind you that the reason you were in front of this committee was to get an order of conditions, and part of the requirement of the order of conditions was this report, which you have in, and the report that Sia is going to give us, but it's also that this order of conditions is a 3-year ongoing study, so we look forward to the first of several annual presentations, such as this.
I would add that the scientific work was improved and enhanced by the input of your committee.
Well, it was a challenging process for all of us.
We would agree with that, too.
Good, but we're glad to see the work that's been done. Sia, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thanks. And I also want to acknowledge that Jerry Patamas, our wastewater superintendent and great friend of Shellfish, is also here, so thanks. Make sure I get this right. To put this project in context, I want to remind everyone that this is part of an ongoing effort to clean up Falmouth's 15 plus or minus estuaries. In April of 2011, Article 17 was passed, which is a $2.7 million appropriation to put the town's planning for wastewater or for comprehensive wastewater planning on a parallel path where we're looking at sewering, important sewer project at Little Pond, and all these alternatives. Not only did town meeting unanimously approve that approach, but the voters at the ballot by a 2-to-1 margin in every precinct said, sewer the Little Pond area and look at alternatives so that the rest of the estuaries can be done in as an affordable manner as possible. And in a landmark certificate, the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs on January 10th issued a certificate of adequacy to the town's final comprehensive wastewater management plan. And that plan breaks new ground in stunning ways to look at alternatives while moving up towards sewering where it needs to be done. And so we're here implementing a new way of planning for wastewater and estuaries restoration. And I think the town really should be proud because we're doing things in a unique and powerful and effective way. Those are the projects. We're here to talk about shellfish cultivation, but the Water Quality Management Committee has been diligently pursuing the permeable reactive barriers, the inlet widening of Bourne's Pond, denitrifying septic systems, road runoff remediation, and one of my favorites, eco-toilets, all along. So on to shellfish. We were here almost a year ago, and we did get an order of conditions, and we are very thankful for those conditions because it allowed us to begin this demonstration project at Little Pond. This is Little Pond. This is Narragansett Street, and the site, this polygon here, is the 2-acre oyster demonstration area that was given an order of conditions on May 10th. Because as we pursued this project, we started to notice some environmental issues, we came back in October and were granted this emergency areas at close to the inlet of Little Pond in case the salinity got so low that it became counterproductive for the oysters. We haven't had to use this site yet, but these are the 2 sites that are the demonstration project. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this to try to understand how shellfish cultivation fits into the larger context of estuaries restoration. And we believe that it's an important tool when used in combination with other tools. And there are some metrics that we've been able to establish. And I'm bringing this up because it's important to do oyster math with the right numbers. And in this case, the oyster math has to be based on grow-out bags. And from a number of conversations with growers, with the manufacturers of those bags, and some looking at what happens in New Brunswick, Canada, we can be pretty sure, and based on our own experience, that a practical number of bags that can go into Little Pond is about 1,000 per acre. And that gives room for people to get through at Little Pond, for flipping the bags. And so if you take the 1,000 bags and you talk to growers, they say you never want to put more than 150 3-inch oysters in a bag. That's easy math, about 150,000 oysters. So you then look at the nitrogen content in the tissue and in the shell, and you get a number, which is that 42 kilograms of nitrogen per acre per year that an acre of grow-out bags can remove. Now, why am I going through this? I'm going through this because the Cape Cod Commission is also doing some work on alternatives, and they've looked at shellfish. But their shellfish numbers are based on a completely different growing paradigm. Their shellfish numbers are based on oyster reefs. And so when you compare the two, you can see that there's about 6 times more nitrogen removal to 20 times more nitrogen removal from a reef than from our grow-up bags. And that makes sense because A grow-out bag is in one dimension. They're bags and they're growing on the surface, where a reef is in 3 dimensions, so you get a lot more volume of oyster per unit area. And this came to our attention. We had the Water Quality Management Committee had Kurt Felix from Wellfleet, who works in oyster reefs, come and talk about this, which got our committee thinking about reefs. And we wanted to bring before you, as part of our annual update, that we'd like to have the Conservation Commission also think about this reef option, because it has such stunning nitrogen removal potential. So we can do what we can do with our bags, and we're going to continue to pursue those bags, but the reefs are another implementation strategy that we thought would be good to get on the radar screen of the Conservation Commission. And of course, if we pursue this, it would have its own evaluation process that would happen separately. And I think there's been some floating around of numbers about applying the Cape Cod Commission matrix numbers to our Little Pond projects, and I have to say it's like comparing apples and dump trucks. The reefs are a very different paradigm with very different nutrient removal than our oyster bags. So let's not use one to try and plan the other, because it won't work. Our project goals: figure out if we can get a detectable change in the nutrients, measure for regulatory compliance, make sure that the stakeholders, the neighbors around Little Pond, the shellfishers in town, the people who use that resource like the idea of oyster aquaculture, and as Eric mentioned, figure out how to get 1 million and now 2 million oysters in and out of Little Pond without breaking our backs. This slide is 6 months of work in 5 bullets or 6 bullets. These are oysters. They are like grains of sand, and in one bag there's 1 million of them. We take the oysters, we put them in the upwellers. The Department of Marine and Environmental Services has done an awesome job building these. The oysters go in here, and they grow to about 5-6 millimeters, big enough to fit in the bags. And this happens on a bell curve. You guys all know that oysters don't all grow at the same rate. They grow on a bell curve. So over a period of time, these oysters go in here and come out in batches, say 200,000-300,000 oysters at a time, and we put them in bags. They go from here. We take a liter out of our batch that we bring over to Little Pond. We put them in bags. We float them out, and there they sit. They grow. We separate the bags. We take, as they grow, they are more than a liter. We put them in more bags. We split them. And then at the end of the season, and this was taken at the end of October 2013, we move them out and we plant them in areas that will then be harvested by commercial and recreational shellfishers. We've had a really long winter. When I was looking at this picture today, there's snow on the ground, and that was October. There's snow on the ground, and it's March. But we're hardy here in Falmouth. This is one of our relay areas. DMF, Department of Marine Fisheries, gave us a permit to plant. So we put them here in Green Pond, and this is a commercial area. We put buoys out because it's closed. We put signs out because it's closed. We patrol this area. But the shellfish are alive and well and happily growing in Green Pond. And when the season opens in October of 2014, so this year, these are going to be delicious. We also put them at West Falmouth Harbor. This is Chappie Beach. This is across the street where that lovely marsh area is. We put them in there. We moved some up into Abbott's Point. And again, when the season opens, they will be ready for harvest. And we did all this so that we could do some testing of how these oysters impact water quality and how growing oysters impacts the resource areas that are important to the Conservation Commission. And so we have 2 kinds of data. We have grab sampling, which was done every other week, and then we put a couple of instruments in the water, we being SMAST. SMAST put a number of instruments in the water to allow us to get some ongoing sort of real-time data analysis going. And I'm going to talk about both of those. So this is the grab sampling. We submitted the technical report to the Conservation Commission, and if you brought the report with you and you turn to page 30, you can look at the stations that I'm going to be talking about the data for. So page 30, look, this is Little Pond again, and there are sampling stations that have been sampled by SMAST for decades. Head, LP1, LP2, and LP3. The pond watchers go out and they take samples faithfully. SMAST, when they started thinking about how do you monitor for this oyster project, suggested we put all these monitoring stations in, the ones in red. So in 2013, the sampling began to get what we're calling more of a high spatial resolution, so closer together so we can see what goes on down the gradient of Little Pond. We monitored for all the parameters we told you we were going to monitor when we came before you with our notice of intent. And this is a sort of a picture. It's also in your report, of course, for the dates that were sampled and the fact that we got 229, SMAS got 229 data points for us to try to understand the ramifications of. So the ramifications of the data. I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about the 2012 data because that was the baseline for which we were with which we were going to compare what happened in 2013. And there are 3 parameters that I'm going to talk about from 2012. And the first one is dissolved oxygen. And the take-home message here is there was hypoxia in 2012. That means that the dissolved oxygen concentration fell below 3 milligrams per liter. There were anoxic events that meant the dissolved oxygen went below 6, which is the Massachusetts water quality standard for oxygen. And that phenomenon has existed for decades. So the same kinds of data were reported in the 2006 MEP report. So Little Pond has not changed so much in its dissolved oxygen condition over a decade. I think this is a fascinating slide. When I saw this, I was really impressed. And what this slide is looking at the total nitrogen. The mean is the yellow one in 2012, and the black is the average historical from the MEP report from 2006. Clearly, the total nitrogen hasn't changed very much either. So what we've got, what is manifesting itself in this data is that the MEP standards, or the reported numbers in the 2006 report, and the baseline conditions that we established for the project are consistent. And I think that's very important. So then we looked at salinity, or SMAS looked at salinity, and it's reported in their report. And there is a very interesting phenomenon that exists in Little Pond, and it existed in 2012, existed in 2013, and that is this stratification. In some ways, Little Pond is like 2 microenvironments. What happens at the surface is different and separate and stratified from what happens near the bottom. And you can see that here this is the surface has lower salinity. The bottom has higher salinity. The surface has lower salinity in 2012, and the bottom has higher salinity. And this is not just true of the saltiness of the water. It's also true of where the phytoplankton is and dissolved oxygen. And you'll see how this plays out in understanding the oyster effect as we get into it. So here's 2013. I'm rushing through this data to be brief. The story here, the take-home point, is that there was a visible and noticeable effect near the oysters in the water sampling. The first thing that is obvious, the first thing is the chlorophyll. Now chlorophyll is in phytoplankton. I won't get into why, but chlorophyll is a good indicator of phytoplankton. And what we see in the data is that there is this decline. Now if you look at your map, LP1 is above the oysters. LP1.1 is above the oysters, and LP1.2 is above where we put the oysters. LP1.3 is dead center in the oyster area, and LP2 is right outside it. And what is clear here is that there is a spike in chlorophyll, and if you look at this as particulate organic carbon, there's a spike at LP 1.2 in both of these before the oysters. And this is taking at the ebbing tide. So as the tide's coming down away from the head and towards the inlet of Oyster Pond, before you get to the oyster area, there's a spike in chlorophyll, there's a spike in POC, and through the area where the oysters are, there is a measurable and noticeable decline in the concentrations. There's also a spike here, which is quite downstream of where the oysters are, and then it declines significantly. And when I look at this, I'm saying, so why is there a spike here? And the answer is, well, there are phytoplankton blooms happening in Oyster Pond. This is a biologically active area. This is hot times, August, September. There are phytoplankton blooms, and there's one here that seems to be being taken up by the oysters. And here, if you look on your map, what you see, I told you need your map. What you see on your map is this is pretty far downstream. And then LP3 is in what's called the lower Little Pond area. It's in the lower pond. It's twice as wide. There's twice as much volume of water. It's closer to Vineyard Sound. And so what's happening at the second bloom is it's just getting mixed. So there's a dilution effect happening there. There is no dilution effect here. This has to be something else. So what do good scientists do? A good scientist would say, well, you see this for 2013, but was the same thing true in 2012? Because if you see the same phenomenon in 2012 where there were no oysters, you can't really say this is an oyster effect. However, we don't see this in 2012. In 2012, this is the chlorophyll data. This is the data I just showed you. What you actually see is a spike or an increase in the chlorophyll at LP 1.3, just as it was where it was going down in 2013. So this data is telling the story of an oyster effect in the surface waters. A corroborating piece of evidence for this is this phaeophyton data. Now, I'm told that phaeophyton is produced as shellfish consume chlorophyll. And so what we see here is a spike in phaeophyton as a byproduct of chlorophyll uptake. And nope, we don't see it in 2012. So there seems to be evidence building that there is an oyster effect happening in the vicinity of where the oysters are. And there's more. Total nitrogen. What we see in the total nitrogen is very much a sort of an echoing of this phenomenon. In 2012, there's a gradual decline from LP1, which is upstream, down to near the inlet where there's a lot more fresh water diluting the total nitrogen coming in from the head. But in 2013, we seem to see something quite different in these surface waters. We seem to be seeing this spike again, but a decline through the oyster deployment area. And it's 0.216 milligrams per liter, so it's actually a real number. One of the things that SMAS did to try to understand what might be happening in the total nitrogen is they looked at the different components. We said we were going to do that when we came back, when we were here last year, that we weren't just going to look at total nitrogen, we're going to look at the fractions of the nitrogen. And you can see that in this graph here. There's dissolved organic nitrogen, there's particulate organic nitrogen, there's dissolved inorganic nitrogen. And lo and behold, when SMAS studied the data, what they found is that it happens to be the particulate organic nitrogen fraction, the PON, that seems to be declining. And that makes sense because oysters uptake phytoplankton. So we're seeing things that make practical common sense, but we're seeing them echoed in different data. So that's very encouraging. And so my kids do science fair projects, and when they do their projects, they want to get an answer. They want to know what they know from the data collection and analysis. And I had to say to them this year, you know, good science doesn't experiment, and you end up with maybe an answer to one question, but 3 or 4 more questions unanswered that you want to drill into. And SMAS has done this with this report. They've looked at this, they've come up with some answers, but coming up soon in the recommendations that they have, this particular organic nitrogen phenomenon is something that we want to actually ask some more questions about next year, so that when we do come back, we'll be able to express some more detail about this particular finding. Okay, on to the mooring data. There's zones, there are moorings. These are the instruments that are recording at 15-minute intervals. Things like dissolved oxygen, we were looking at the chlorophyll again, we were looking at salinity again, and then they took measurements on turbidity. If you look on page 52 of your report, you can look at the map and see where these monitoring instruments were recorded. The main ones that we're going to talk about were the ones here in the oyster area. This is a very, very interesting finding. And what this is the information from 2013 superimposed on the historical data from 2002. And the story here is that, well, let's start with the chlorophyll. The total chlorophyll hasn't really changed much over a decade. We still have algae blooms, we still have a degraded estuary, Little Pond is still eutrophic, and the chlorophyll numbers show it over a long period of time. Same thing with dissolved oxygen. What you're seeing here are spikes and uptake. You know, when photosynthesis occurs, you produce a lot of oxygen. And then in the afternoon, you have a crash as the respiration cycle starts. So you have photosynthesis producing oxygen, respiration taking it all up. And we've got concentrations here above the atmospheric saturation of 8. So 8 milligrams per liter is about what the atmosphere is. We're going way high, and then we're almost going to 0. So again, hypoxia. Same thing that we saw in 2012. It continues to be that way, and the oysters haven't changed much.
Sia, could you tell us where these data were taken relative to where the oysters are?
Yes, that's a great question. It's upper B. This data is taken from the upper B zone, which is in the oyster area.
Could you go back to
Yep.
the, okay.
Upper B is right here. It's right upstream of this. Now, I'm going to go forward because you're asking and show you that what is very, very interesting is that the bottom zones, the data sits on top of each other. So what's going on, and this is salinity, but the other, you can see in your actual report the different parameters that were measured. The conditions in the bottom were very consistent from one zone to another. So the bottom zones, which are the black and the red and the yellow and the blue, show the same values. This is the surface zone. And so this graph, while I'm here talking about it, shows that stratification that I talked about before.
Yeah, so it's heavily stratified.
Heavily stratified, yes. And these decreases in salinity down to almost crazy numbers correlate with rain events. And that's shown in section 4 of the actual report, that these are rain events. And so you can see there's not only stratification, but there's occlusion of the inlet. So Little Pond is acting like a pond in many, many ways as a result of the inlet. So let me just go back to this real quick. And the point of this is you had asked us for
Can you
some...
go back to the previous, though?
Yeah. That's the one. That's dissolved oxygen. I showed you the zone data for the
Okay, but it looks,
salinity.
I mean, I just want to comment, we can talk about it at the end, but it looks like there's a clear difference between 2002 and 2013 in the dissolved oxygen. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, and we talked about that. We didn't think it was, anyway, yes, we will. And upward. And this might be a good one to look at too, because what this shows is the surface zoned and the basically the cycling.
Diel cycle, right?
Yep, the dial cycle. And this is the bottom in the dial cycle. And this is upper A, and that's the oyster raft, which is the surface. So we do have some good data. Probably there's at least one PhD thesis in this data, maybe 2. And what we're trying to balance at the Water Quality Management Committee is interesting data that can lead you to understand the estuary better and understanding the data to operate the oyster demonstration project and get to an analysis of the nutrients. So there is a lot of great information that you could spend a lot of time drilling into. And make sure I'm going next. So this is my last data slide, and it is the turbidity data. the turbidity data shows something really important. Turbidity is the opposite of clarity. And so when we were there working over last summer, the neighbors would say, well, the water is more clear than we have ever seen it. And I would nod my head and say, you know, great, good to know. Other people would stop me and say, you know, that water looks great. And I'd say, okay, that's good to know. I want to see the data. And then when the data came in and we see that the light penetration is the highest where the oysters are. So again, this is oyster 2, which is the location where the raft is in the oyster deployment area is the highest. And then we see that the actual light extinction coefficient, which is the opposite. The extinction is how fast do we get rid of the light, is almost the lowest in the oyster area relative to upstream and downstream. We say, you know, the water's probably clearer around where the oysters were than before. So we've got some indication that oysters are improving the clarity of the water as well. So what can we say? Well, there's good and there's not so good. And I guess I'll start with the not so good, which is the total nitrogen levels in 2012 and 2013, and from just the aggregate look at the numbers at the stations, it didn't change. The total nitrogen numbers are the same. They were the same 10 years ago. They were probably the same 15 years ago. It's a degraded eutrophic estuary, and the nitrogen numbers didn't change. There's still hypoxia. There's been hypoxia. And that didn't change either. But the good news is that the oysters actually produced a modest improvement in a localized way. Clarity, the improvement in the reduction in particulate organic nitrogen, the chlorophyll reduction, the phaeophytin going up, so the time series data for the clarity. So there seemed to be an improvement in the near field. And we believe, based on the benthic study that was reported in the SMAST report, that there are no negative impacts. So that was a concern. Our do no harm was our charge. And so the idea is, have the oysters hurt the estuary? And the answer is not that we can see. So they haven't done any harm. They seem to be having some localized improvement. And with those localized improvements that we see in the data, we're very optimistic, because next year, or this year, we're planning to put 2 million oysters in. And not only are there going to be more, but they're going to start at a bigger size and grow earlier in the season, so the volume of activity will be more. So where we saw some changes with small oysters, we expect to come back next year and be able to report bigger changes in this, an amplification of the kinds of trends that we were able to report tonight. And so based on that, as I promised, SMATS did have some recommendations for doing some additional work, and I'm assured at the same price for next year, that helps us drill into some of this data and really understand it better. And the idea is, put some more oysters in for us, guys, so we can see some stuff better. And look at denitrification. So we're hoping to look at there's the sediment oxygen demand, the water column oxygen demand, how much is actually the particulate that's being added by the oysters. So to really get more into the denitrification aspects of what the oysters are doing is one recommendation. Another recommendation is to look at that particulate organic carbon, that pond fraction that seems to be what the oysters are acting on, and try to quantify it doing some tracer studies. A third recommendation is to, instead of just take data during the ebbing tide, so as the tide's going out, to actually look at 3 tidal cycles, ebb, slack, flood, and understand the flow, the total nitrogen, and that, again, that PON, that particulate organic nitrogen fraction, as it's moving in tidal cycles, to try and sort of deconstruct what's dilution versus what are the oysters really doing. So to kind of drill into that some more. We want to keep all the stations the same so we can compare next year and the year before to the following year. And we're going to add a station. SMAS is recommending adding LP2A between LP2 and LP2.1 to get even more temporal or spatial resolution than what we had last year. we're going to report COT concentrations by calculations next year. And then after SMAS looks at the flow findings and some of these other data that come in from this year's oysters, they're going to consider looking at the MEP model and running it to see if after next year, or after this growing season, 2014, we might be able to determine total nitrogen removal by oysters. So there's a lot of additional analysis that we're going to pursue this year. And with all that extra, the thought is to do a little bit less by omitting May and December. Mostly because those dates aren't helping the analysis. They're not helping us see the oyster effect. And not do another year of storm drain analysis, because as is reported in, I think, section 5 of the report, the storm drain analysis from last year showed that there's a de minimis amount of nitrogen going in at that storm drain, and it's not confounding the data. So to deploy people at 2 o'clock in the morning when it starts to rain doesn't seem necessary 2 years in a row. So I said way more than I needed to, and now I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jen?
Want to turn something
Huh?
on? Want some minutes on?
Thanks. So, I have some questions, but I'll open it up to my fellow commissioners first. Court?
I'll hold.
Mike?
First, thank you. It caused me to go back and do some more reading. Your Massachusetts Estuaries Project, January 2006.
Brian should come up here. It's his project.
I was impressed. It's a pretty robust mathematical study of the pond, so all this fits into a strong setting, which I had somehow lost sight of or never knew. Under your primary purpose was to demonstrate that you could establish TMDLs. And one of the things that I want to be sure is that as you scale up, you're now at about 4% area cover by your pods, your pans, as opposed to the 50 acres, 45 acres, you get about 2%. When you're scaling up, you're going to have could have other effects. So as you take advantage next year, be sure that you collect enough data to say that you can move forward in the future. If this is all successful, you're going to come back, and I am a little bit concerned about when you got 4% of the area covered and you get one result, you're going to come back and say, now we want to put percent down. That all the data is still good. I did notice that you've got under your recommendations, I'm showing my weakness. I'm a civil engineer by training, and ask you to consider whether velocity measurements, flow measurements with the tide, beneath, upstream and downstream of or at least one transect at your pads to help give you some idea of how this stuff is actually being transported.
Right.
Seems to make sense to me. You are doing, yeah, and I'm just saying on the flood tide or on both tides to get flow measurements.
Okay.
Because you do have that great model that's showing flow and down there to be able to compare that against to help calibrate or readjust.
Sure.
And I'm thinking ahead that from my perspective on this board, I'm happy. I'm not sure how DEP would take your data and say it demonstrates what your primary objective is.
I don't think this year does, but I think it starts to form the basis.
Okay, so that I'm saying you may do extra, and I think the velocity measurements would be a big help.
You're
I'm good.
really talking about volume flow.
Yes,
You have to take into account that it's a stratified water body.
sure.
So you're not just going to be measuring what's on the surface, the water movement on the
Yeah,
surface.
then you just want some idea of the mass of water moving through this thing, and velocities would help you get there. I'm good.
Tomas?
I'm sitting here and the Red Sox came through my mind. And the reason that they did was, I don't watch the Red Sox, I listen to them. Because I find the announcing seamless. I enjoy it, and it's factual, and I can visualize it. a tremendous presentation. Anyone who has the command of vocabulary and a project like that, you had to have had hands-on and boots in the water. That was seamless and was very informative for a novice. The biggest thing on this is it's an organic thing with me. It's a very simple thing, in my eyes, to understand. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The flows and stratifications and things, I have a grasp of it, barely. But it intrigues me that not just yourself in this committee, but others in that area, the ones commenting on the clarity of the water. It is something we're all encouraged with, and I think that this going forward is anything other than positive. You know, it's just a valuable threshold for the next step. And compliments to you. It was a pleasure to hear it explained as well as it was.
Russ?
Thank you, Sia. Nice job. No, all set. No question.
Okay, I have a couple of comments. First, I want to talk about the idea of reefs, because I've seen areas in Wellfleet where they're planning to put these reefs, and often they're areas where there's very high water flow. However, if, as for water quality, if you're thinking of reefs, that the other function of oyster reefs, as we're all aware from Hurricane Sandy, remember that New York used to be a big oyster area because there used to be big oyster reefs that protected the shoreline. If in fact this is just to the Water Quality Committee, if you're ever thinking of something with reefs, think of it with a dual purpose that was also protecting some of our coastlines that are, and you all know some of our ponds are suffering eroding banks, and so this could be a dual, have a dual function. Just this is a suggestion to you, and yes, you, Brian. In the future, it would really be helpful to have the scales for all the slides be the same. Sometimes the scales on the 2012 data or the data prior, cumulative data from 2004 to 2012 compared to 2013, you have different scales. And it's nice to be able to hold them together or, in fact, have them on the same slide to look at the differences. I would encourage you to do monitoring on several different tidal cycles, and also to continue the short-term data collection by where the oysters are, because this is one of the things that Mike brought out when we had the hearing for the order of conditions, the notice of intent. If we ever do run into problems with the oysters, if it's a really hot summer or we really get a lot of rain, something like that, it would be good to be able to have those physical and chemical data to compare to what we're seeing happening to the oysters. So I encourage you, you're required by your order of conditions, but we would like to continue to see those changes.
It's not just the law, it's a good idea.
Yeah. And the other question I have, and Brian might know the answer to this, but the relative amount of particulate nitrogen taken up by oysters versus sequestered in pseudofeces and dropping to the bottom.
Yeah, I can sort of answer that, but also that's...
You have to come up, Brian.
Better than the alternative.
And you have to tell us who you are.
I'm Brian Howes. I'm the Director of the Coastal Systems Program at the School for Marine Science and Technology at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. We have proposed this year to, because this is a PON question, right? Actually, better re-ask the question, then I'll answer it more fully.
All right, well, I'm already thinking about how you could test this, and I can tell you why I'm interested.
Yeah.
And that is relative amount of nitrogen
Oh, that's it.
taken up into the living oysters, either tissue or shell, versus what's sequestered in pseudofeces, which then, as you know,
Yeah.
gets trapped in the bottom.
Right. I'm on it. For in this report, we recommended that one of the things that we'll do is we will put in, not sediment traps because they have problems, but basically pseudofeces and feces traps. So we'll be able to capture those without the problems of sediment traps. They have their own problem, you put them on the
Right,
bottom, it's a
I know.
problem.
I know, there's a whole
But
set
if
of
you sort-
literature on that.
Right, but if you sort of hook them to the floats, the actual where the oysters are, then you can actually avoid that problem and get a good estimate. We're thinking maybe we'll try first weekly collections of what's coming off of, 100 oysters at a time, and we'll do a bunch of those. And so that we'll capture it. It won't be possible, really, I don't think, to separate the feces and pseudofeces, but we'll at least get what they're
Well,
excreting
just
that goes.
relative, right.
You got it. And the rule of thumb is, though, that what you get is you get about, for every 100 grams of material that oysters hit, they tend to knock off about 90 grams are going just out, in pseudofeces. 10 grams they might ingest. Of the 10 grams they ingest, only maybe 1 gram
1 or 2 grams.
goes into, real tissue and such. So the reason we want to do denitrification is that there's, and we've been pushing this for a long time, is that the real effect of oysters may be to stimulate denitrification in a way that the effect of nitrogen removal by that process dwarfs anything to do with the tissue meat removals, maybe 10 times that amount. So by getting a good measurement, and you actually have a system, you can do that here. The problem that we've had in the past is other places have been sort of just going in where it already exists. But here we have something that was set up for measurement. And we knew this before it was even done. So now we have the ability maybe to really get those measurements, which would really magnify for the town what they would get out of this, more than just the conservative estimate of grind it up and measure it. Okay. Do you want to answer that? You want me to answer that oxygen question?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm still a little bit concerned with that oxygen, as you
Right.
could
So
see.
I thought I knew that.
Are you going to try to alleviate my concerns?
Well, I don't know. I'll do my best.
All right.
But
Well, you just give me your answer and then.
right. In the 2006 report, what we saw at that site, and a bunch of sites that see it shown, we'll go back to it, but was we had hypoxia in the pond, the oxygen dropped, let's look at the top graph, in the red is the new data, the blue is the old data. In the new data, what we have is it's up and down, but it really does tank and stay down for periods of a time, and it really doesn't get much over atmospheric equilibration, which is around 8. And you see it doesn't really get much above 9. So that's sort of what a classic way of people think of oxygen problems. But what we've found now in examining 60 estuaries for periods of time, what we've found is that in fact high oxygen values are equally indicative of eutrophication. And it makes sense, right? You think about it,
right.
you get this algal soup, and
Right, and
shine the
it's
sun
bouncing
on
back
it.
and forth.
Yeah, and it goes way high. And so we actually have another metric that we use in the MEP, we used it here too, which is when you have exceedances of, say, 10, which would be 25% above air equilibration, and higher, that actually is also indicative of a nutrient problem because it means you got way too many algae, you're not ventilating the system, and you're building up this oxygen. So although the graphs look different, the effect that they're measuring, they're both diagnostic of the same effect of eutrophication. Why 1 year we had this high effect, I can't tell you. It could be there's a little more stratification.
We'll wait and see what happens next year.
But the critical piece is using that data to determine the health status of the pond, they say the same thing.
Yeah, right.
Good. Very good. All right.
Courtney?
I just wanted to echo your point on these graphs, that the scales remain the same. As a layman,
It's easier to
flunked
interpret them.
high school math, it makes it harder indeed to follow these graphs when the scales change.
We tried very hard, and we did do some looking, obviously, this.
No, and you know, the other point about that is when you shift scales, you wonder that the visual effect of the graph becomes hard to follow. In other words, you know, if you have a scale that shows a rise of 100 feet, and the scale on one thing is an inch, and the other side is 5 inches, it's going to look pretty dramatically different when you chart it. And then you go, oh my goodness, you see, this is a dramatic change. When in fact, if the scales were the same, it wouldn't maybe look so much. So it'd be more helpful for us laymen to have consistent scales. I was going to say that, and then you brought it up and it prodded me.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Are these being
Excuse me, if you have a question, you have to come up and say who. If your question is they're being harvested, the ones that were collected have been put out to certain areas and can be harvested in October.
1 million oysters were planted for harvest in October.
If you have questions, you have to come up and say who you are and. Okay, well, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Madam Chair?
Good job.
Yes?
Well, people brought up the scale.
Yeah.
When you're doing longitudinal sections, if you could put the data on the same distance as the monitoring points. You got them all jammed together. You can't see. If you look at figure 3.6, from LP1, from the headwater to the end, if you could put the data on the same spot, it would help.
He's just saying, put your data points, scale your data points so that they're the distances that they are in the pond from one another. So you have some stations that are close to one another and have those data points near one another.
You know, I
That's
think
what he's
this-
saying.
The vertical scale thing works for me because we try to do that. and
Well, that's what I'm asking you to do. I don't
That's easy.
need
That's
the,
doing
that,
this-
but
doing this
some of my
scale
colleagues would prefer
is
that.
gonna cost him a couple extra grand for graphics because this graphics pack doesn't do that.
If you think you can get by DEP as it is, I'm not going to cause the town
He's
any
an
money.
engineer, he can
The same
figure
way
this
we do
out.
it for the MEP.
I'm just being an engineer, and I like things in true scale, as a cross-section, and if it's going to cost money, and you think DEP's happy, I'm happy.
No,
Don't,
MEP is never happy, but they might accept it.
I just want the y-axis changed.
don't let it be said that cost the town
Consistent.
money. For Pete's sake.
Before you do that, take a course in graphics 101.
Thank you very much, that was a good
job.
presentation.
Thank you very much. Do we need anything on this?
No,
No? Can we?
we just need to ask all of
Can
you,
we make a
who I'm
motion
sure
to,
have lots to say to one
thank them,
another,
or-
go all the way
Yeah,
down
that's
around the corner. Okay, request to continue enforcement order. Gene Wright, 19 Miami Avenue, East Falmouth, for clearing, building, and altering wetland resource area and buffer to resource areas as defined in FWR 10.00 and 310 CMR 10.00.
Yes, Madam Chairman, due to the weather, the applicant's representative did ask if we could continue it one more week, and I said yes.
Oh, the applicant's representative is in the 30 inches in Nantucket?
No.
Oh, okay.
Motion to continue for 1 week, and that would be the last continuance.
Yes. April 2nd.
Second.
Are there any other comments? Any comments from the audience? Okay, motion on the table is to continue, to continue 19 Miami Avenue to April 2nd. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so move. Request for a determination of applicability. Pamela Cohn, 396 Edgewater Drive East, East Falmouth, for permission to remove the existing 10-foot by 34-foot deck and rebuild in the same footprint.
Yes, Madam Chairman, the applicant is requesting a continuance until April 2nd.
So move.
Second.
Any questions on the board? Any questions from the audience? Okay, motion on the table is a continuance of 396 Edgewater Drive East till April 2nd. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Request for hearings under a notice of intent. All hearings of the Falmouth Conservation Commission are heard simultaneously under the authority of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and the Falmouth Wetlands Bylaw. Although a single decision is issued, it represents a separate decision under each authority. First is Edward and Jennifer McAuliffe, 67 Quonset Road, Falmouth, for permission to remove invasive plant species, apply herbicide treatment, install landscape fabric and native shrub species, and the associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'll save any of my comments until after the presentation.
Mike, good evening.
Madam Chairman? For the record, my name is Michael Borselli from Falmouth Engineering, and I represent the applicant along with Maria Hickey.
Good evening, Maria.
Is the landscape contractor who will be doing the work and describe the methodology on the invasives removal that's proposed at this property. The property is 67 Quonset Road. It's on Oyster Pond, coincidentally, and has frontage on two sides of Oyster Pond. The lot is shown in a large scale, existing single-family dwelling, typical landscape and appurtenances. There's a non-eroding coastal bank that runs around the property and actually also wraps around here. But on this westerly side, there's a significant amount of invasive plant material that we're proposing to eradicate and try to manage. You've seen two similar projects just north of here, the abutting property and the one just beyond that, north of that property. The wetland resources in question are land under a salt pond. There's a boundary of a salt pond. There's, of course, the non-eroding coastal bank and land subject to coastal storm flowage. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maria to go over the methodology.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Hi, Maria.
Hi, good evening. I'm Maria Hickey from Maria Hickey and Associates, landscape contractors. I'd like to hand out some pictures,
Okay.
give you all a better idea. I took the first picture on September 27th, and I stood over on number 63, Quonset, and you can see the flagpole, also shown on this plan here. So just to give you an orientation. And we are currently working on 53 and 63 to eradicate some of the invasive plants that are strangling the native plants. 67 Quonset, this applicant, doesn't have as many invasive plants, but they do still have a considerable amount that our concern is if they're not removed, they'll cross over onto the two projects that we're currently working on. So the second picture I took on Tuesday. Jen was kind enough to come out and meet me on site so that we can discuss and point out. It's just selective removal of the invasives that are in this coastal bank. Primarily there's privet, there's some Japanese holly, there's bittersweet, and there's porcelain berry vine. Those are the four most significant things that are seen in there. We're going to cut them and dip with glyphosate, so it'll go down into the roots. And then once that process has been done, we'll go in and we will plant native plants where we had cut out the invasive species. And after we plant the native plants, we'll put down landscape fabric so that just in case there's a random seed or root that didn't get killed off, it'll prevent it from coming back up and reinfecting the area.
Okay.
Any questions?
Jen?
No, I don't have any questions, Maria. I did go out, when did I go out, yesterday morning?
Yeah. I know. And here I are in boots and with clothes.
Yesterday morning, Mario did have some concerns, and I just think it's because he was looking at the two projects next door. So we did talk about it being
Correct.
a targeted removal and not
Correct.
so much getting in there with any sort of machine, because the two properties next door, they were, those banks
It was
were
all
completely
invasive,
infested with,
right.
All kinds of
So
stuff.
there's going to be a more targeted removal of the invasives with planting, and I think it's fine.
Okay, and you also, you haven't replanted those two next door?
No, because of the weather
Yeah.
conditions, the
But
snow.
could you put some sort of sediment sock at the,
Sure.
at the base?
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of open
You got it.
dirt.
You got it.
We talked about fabric yesterday.
You got it. And the reason that I hadn't was because we were out just Monday and
Well, you
Tuesday.
had just been, you could tell you had been working, but
We just cleared and had sprayed the glyphosate. So I didn't want to cover anything up until the glyphosate had a chance to make it down into the root
Okay.
system. But certainly, and we're hoping to plant in about 2 to 3 weeks.
okay,
Those
but
two
just
properties.
in case we
Correct.
get a big
You got it.
rainstorm. Court?
So you're essentially, you're cutting this stuff and then you're spraying it, just spraying it?
Right
And-
where we made the cut into the stem.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
that
it's
goes
a
right
fresh
down into
cut.
the roots. Correct.
Are you being optimistic, or are you confident in your methodology that that's going to kill about 90% of the roots? I mean, is that?
I'm fairly confident. I've done quite a few of these projects over the years. And I don't know if any of you on the commission know my aunt. I know Mario, who's not here tonight, knows her, Ann Buckley, who's a pretty well-respected botanist. And I've done a lot of projects with her similar to this. The landscape fabric really seems to make the difference because it does not allow anything to grow up through it. For 6 years, it's warranted and guaranteed. And we find even with the Phragmites down in Woods Hole, it's been really successful in preventing reinfestation. Otherwise, you're in there quite often, weeding out and you're disrupting the coastal bank. And the whole purpose is to stay out of it and let the plants.
Biodegradable, right? Your landscape
No,
fabric?
Yes.
I mean, my experience with porcelain berry is it's very tough stuff,
Oh, it's awful.
and it can be kind of resistant to herbicide. Even, you cut and drip stuff.
Exactly, so that's why we're going that one step further and covering with landscape fabric,
Okay.
just to give it our
So
absolute
then what do you
best.
do with so your plants that you put in, sort of you dig a hole in the
Correct.
fabric and drop it in?
Actually, what we do is we dig the holes and plant first, and then the landscape fabric, they're 3-foot widths. I cut a slash in, and it's
Okay.
kind of like making a bed, we put it down and then
No,
we pull
okay.
it.
Yeah.
And pin it on either side, so literally, there's no exposed surface.
But, okay, and the water can go in the water? the plants?
Exactly. Water and air can pass through,
Okay,
but nothing can come from the underside up, because down to 2 inches into the soil, those seeds can still germinate. So you're right, it's almost impossible to get rid of every root, every seed, but, we give it our absolute best, chance of doing that.
okay, thank you.
Mike?
Civil engineering, and we're not going to find this fabric floating around in the pond at some
No,
point, are we?
no. It's pinned down with, the pins are about this long, they're U-shaped, and we,
Okay, we'll move right along to Tom.
I like your second picture, because there's a really nice limit of work in the background. Because I had stopped by that site, and I hadn't had a chance to stop back and revisit, and I could see that that's been addressed.
Maybe it's Tom that they spoke with.
I'm sorry.
Maybe it was Tom they spoke with.
Oh, okay.
It was a really positive conversation with the contractor. And I was looking at another site that was abutting this,
Correct.
so I got proof. This is good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been working hard. It's a big problem out there.
No questions?
It would be nice to have this whole corner
Ah, I agree.
cleared out,
I agree.
at least for a while. It's a never-ending battle,
I've been working at it
Or almost
for over
never
10
ending.
years. It's been,
right, Tom? Getting rid of invasives.
so.
Okay.
No further questions?
I don't have any questions, but you must have at least one question. You haven't had one. I'm surprised.
I did, but I asked
Oh,
mine,
I have one for you.
I asked mine earlier. It was about the,
We have the DEP file now.
You do. it's
about
my
the sediment
question.
sock next door.
It's a comment.
Is it a good one?
No.
Uh-oh.
Building demolition and reconstruction.
Oh, we thought
Confused
we were-
some of my.
Oh, yeah, that confused people.
We thought if we put that in, it would give us
Yeah,
the rights to
yeah.
do that.
No.
You see-
Just to let you know that you're not going to get the, you're not going to, that'll be a special
have stood
condition.
up,
You
Mike.
don't get permission to do that.
It had a telephone conversation that said, "Why am I here?"
Thank you.
A motion to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Thank you.
Can we have a second? Any further questions? Any questions from the audience? Okay, motion on the table is to close this hearing and take it under advisement. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. James Gardner, 4 Little Harbor Road, Woods Hole, for permission to replace and relocate deck footings, remove debris, hand point and repair the existing stone seawall and the associated excavating, grading, and landscaping. And Susan, this is David Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good
Apologies
evening,
that I
David.
don't have a phone board. Please fill out your plans.
Oh, my. We should have sent a message back with Chip.
Pull the screen
We
up.
can put-
Pull the screen up.
I have one question before we start, Madam Chairman. David, we check at 4:30 for your DEP number.
No number,
What?
no number.
No number, okay.
Thank you for that.
Not a problem. Thanks, Mel.
This is an intelligence test. I saw it.
Yeah, I didn't-
Oh, we saw that the other day.
There you go.
You actually did a lot better
Voila.
than the people at the Board of Selectmen.
You done that
the other day.
Pardon me? I haven't, but I watched that at the Board of Selectmen's meeting the other day.
Struggled with that before, it's not easy.
Oh, it was comical.
The property's at the head of Little Harbor and Woods Hole. You'll see up here the old railroad right of way, which is now the bike path. To the south is a small town-owned beach and then the Coast Guard base. Majority of the work is to repair the existing deck. If you look on sheet 2, see the deck was previously supported by posts that were resting on a piece of concrete that was adhered to the wall. Some time ago, it fell off. We'd like to move the posts back, new footings, remove the concrete from the resource area, gently tap on the remaining concrete, see if it's loose. If it's not, probably leave it in place. If it falls off easily, retrieve that and take it ashore. While we're there, the wall could use some maintenance, hand pack the small stones, hand grout. The wall to the south has been completely undermined in places. You had a chance to see it, the parts that are hanging in space. There was a concern that that would fail, fall onto the beach. We proposed putting stones underneath it by hand, appropriate sized stones that fit, some filter fabric on the back soil surface, some trap rock, and some 1.5-inch stone to stabilize that. Not a full restoration, but a stabilization that would keep it from failing. And that's it. Access is across lawn from the bike path.
Pretty short and sweet.
Yeah, maintenance and a repair.
Jen?
I have no question.
That deck's staying the same, David?
Absolutely. The deck is, we're not doing any work to the deck except the piers underneath and then the carrying timber, which is now out at the outer face, the new carrying timber in line with the new piers.
I think it's a good project. It really needs to be done.
Good.
No questions.
No question.
Somebody want to make a motion?
Unfortunately, David needs to continue because he doesn't have a DEP number, so we can continue it
To next
to next
week?
week with a DEP number only, and Mr. Martin does not have to attend if he does not feel like it.
I request a continuance for 1 week, only for submission of the DEP number.
So,
Please.
And you're
Never
certainly
say
welcome
only,
to
Dave.
attend if you
Something
like.
could come up
Sure.
in the week, but
You
right
can't
now-
say that, but it's very unlikely
That's
Very
fine.
unlikely.
If something does come up during the week, that we'll let Jen know, and Jen will let you know
Great, thank you for
to
that.
come back.
All
On
right.
behalf of the applicant, I'd like to move till April 2nd.
Second.
Okay, motion on the table for a continuance to April 2nd. Are there any questions from the board? Any questions from the audience?
Thank you.
Not a problem.
Any questions from Jen? Any final comments from David?
No, thank you.
All right, all in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved.
Call Christina or the other.
Well, I will. I didn't, try not to follow the, not absolutely necessary.
Pedraic and Sarah McCahill. Is that an Irish name?
Yeah.
Okay, it's appropriate week for it. 96 Alder Lane, North Falmouth, for after-the-fact permission to expand the existing wood deck and also to remove and reconstruct the storage shed, relocate the outdoor shower, install native mitigation planting, and the associated clearing, grading, and landscaping. Good evening, Barbara. Jen, any questions?
Not at the moment,
Actually, I like this better. I'm trying to do it. Okay, good evening. For the record, Barbara Frappia with Warwick and Associates. This property is in Wild Harbor Estates in North Falmouth, 96 Alder Lane. And the applicant is filing for a permit to install this deck as shown here. Also to get rid of an unpermitted tool shed in the back, which was put there by the previous owner. To replace that tool shed with a smaller shed up against the back of the house, and to do mitigation planting and restoration planting, a combination of both. This property is in a flood zone. There is a coastal bank, which actually the house is part of that coastal bank. As you can see, it outlined there in orange. It's part of the top of the coastal bank. We have a BVW and we have salt marsh. All of the work is on the face of the coastal bank by virtue of it being in the back of the house, and within the buffer, the A buffer to the BVW and the salt marsh. This property was in the past subject of another order, and they received permission to put on this addition to enclose this existing deck and make it a sun porch, and to expand this deck and add a new deck. So that was a permit that they received back in the mid-90s. The owners at that time never did the back deck work. All they did was put on the addition. So what we have here is no enclosure of the old deck. Again, this single deck here. The original deck on this house when it was built in the 80s was 170 square feet. At one point in time, you permitted an additional 264 square feet of decking, so that they would have had 434 square feet of decking on the back of that house. What we're planning here, and this work has already been started, the McCahills didn't realize that they should have come here first, is 373 square feet. So I believe that with the mitigation planning of almost 800 square feet, the restoration planting of another 100 square feet, the removal of the illegal shed, that in the end this will be a better protected resource area. It will not have any negative impact on any of the resource areas, including the coastal bank.
Jen?
Not at the moment, Madam Chairman.
Courtney?
I'll pass for time being.
Mike?
Well, there are some housekeeping issues.
Not anymore.
Well, there's evidence of, I
Oh,
can't
you
say.
mean housekeeping in the with the yard debris and things like that?
Yeah.
Yes, there are, and he has been properly advised that that has to be addressed.
No further questions?
Tom?
Well, that's one of the things I had written down here. I was climbing underneath the deck, and I'm not thoroughly convinced that that's not an increase on what was originally there.
That is what you proposed. That was what was approved before. This was what was originally there. And this is what we're proposing.
Do you have any pictures of that?
I have the site plans and the orders of conditions that addressed it.
That they closed out their order of conditions?
You closed out the original one, yes.
That has a deck of that size?
Yes, it does. This size,
Yeah, the small
the
one.
orange. And it has compliance on that original order. We do have a subsequent order that does not have a certificate of compliance. I've been working, worked with Mark. We're going to close out the other order at the same time.
And that would have been the order that would have enclosed that orange deck?
No. Yeah, the order that would have enclosed the original orange deck and added this and that.
That's closed out.
No, that
No.
isn't closed out. What is closed out is what she's saying is closed out was an original order that permitted the orange deck. Is that correct?
This was part of the original house built in the 80s.
Okay, that was our question.
In the 90s,
Well-
what was proposed was the 2 blue decks and the addition. The only thing that got built in the 90s was this. These 2 blue decks never got built.
Okay,
And that original deck was never enclosed.
Okay,
thank you for clearing that up. Was this started through the building department?
I do believe it was.
Okay.
I
because-
just got the panic phone call, so
I would, being in the trades, I'm assuming the homeowner is doing the construction,
yes, he is.
then he should really, there's a cross-section available at the building department on how some things should be assembled, because some of the stuff that's on-site really isn't adequate. You can use used timbers and such, but there's some things that are not really in his best interests underneath
needs a
there.
building permit.
Yeah, there is no building permit on that.
Right. I suspect when he
Okay.
goes for his building permit that will be addressed. To make it meet code.
Yeah, that would be a good thing.
That would be a good thing.
Outside of the dumping of the leaves and stuff, which, the education of realizing that that's not beneficial, I think that's been addressed.
I have addressed that, yes.
No other comments at this time?
Well,
So the shed showed up in approximately 2009?
No, the shed was there. They purchased the house in '08, and the shed was there when they purchased it.
Okay, because then I look at 2011 in these photographs, and it looks like the deck changed again.
Who knows what has gone on since? I don't know. Again, this was stopped in mid-construction.
Doesn't it look like it's expanded here?
I can only tell you what I have plans for that showed in various points in history what was there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Okay, no further questions.
Court, do you have any?
So the epiphany was, the reason for the epiphany is the building department discovered work being done without a building permit, is that what it was?
Pretty much.
That is often the reason for epiphany.
They were
Well,
issued.
maybe given Tom's comments that things aren't terribly up to code from a building standpoint, maybe he should remove it first and then come and talk to us.
You know, I'm going to say this about that.
I figured you would.
I'm going to say this about that. People move here from East Overshoe west of 128. They don't get it. They move in, they don't.
Excuse, Barbara.
I'm just telling you that that's the truth. I know it is an excuse, it is not an, it's an explanation, although not an excuse. The guy had a ratty deck, he figured, hey, I'm gonna fix my ratty deck. And he goes out and buys some lumber, he grabs some stuff that he had stored in his garage, and he's gonna make his deck bigger. I have done it myself, and I'm more aware than most people. So, you know, I'm just going to say it's an explanation, although not an excuse, you know. But most people have no clue when they come from East Overshoe that towns have regulations, because most towns do not have regulations the way the Cape does. So, you know, am I making an excuse for him? I'm just saying that
State building code they got stopped on.
I understand.
We don't have to go through this. Barbara, I'm with you. I came from the Virgin Islands. I found out I had to pay taxes on my car. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is.
Sometimes
He
it
wasn't
happens.
supposed to build the deck that he's built. There are problems with it. He's gonna have to pull back what he has there right now
And he's gonna
anyway,
fix the problems.
and he has to fix it.
And he's gonna fix problems that he bought that he didn't even create.
When did he buy it, Bob?
Oh, wait.
Oh, 08.
I'm gonna step in a big pile of it right now.
Go for it.
Do you really want to, or do you want to just close the hearing and take it?
No, I
under
want him to be
advisement?
aware of that, as this commissioner, I have no problem with the shed coming out. I have no problem with the existing deck being rebuilt. But the proposed larger with all that, I'm not gonna be, this area has been, this road has been scrutinized many times over. And rebuilding the existing deck, I don't have an issue with. But an
You mean
expansion
the
of
10
it,
by 12 little deck?
the 12 by 14 2, I think is what,
Or this one here, the orange deck only?
the existing, whatever the,
The orange deck.
yep, that would be what I'm, you know,
So
and,
so you don't get, so you end up losing, to me, it's been more beneficial to have the
You know-
900 square
You
feet
know
of
what?
bushes.
We don't even have to talk about this now.
Okay.
We have the information, you asked
Okay.
for something,
All
your
right.
applicant asked for something.
That's right.
We have the information, we can close the hearing and make a decision, and
All by yourselves.
among the five of us, we can discuss this.
Okay.
okay, I just
You
want to
asked,
be aware.
you came in under,
It's a good place to go because.
you came in under the current regulations, Barbara. You came in with a project under the current regulations.
Yes,
If it meets regulations, it can be permitted.
there you go.
We will discuss it. People might have some concerns. They hope that you take message back to your client, but we don't have to discuss it right now.
You don't have a 10-foot separation between your plantings and the house, just to let you know. Your mitigation plantings in the house, or the deck,
Well, from the deck.
still from the structure, and the regs say no. Just
We
letting you
can,
know
that can be conditioned.
Just letting you know, Barbara.
Do we need
Yep.
any more information? Let's have a
Motion
motion.
to close and take it under advisement.
Second.
Any further questions? Any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of the motion on the table, which is to close this hearing and take it under advisement, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thanks, Barbara. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Barbara.
Hey, Barb.
Good night, Mary Jane.
Linda and Michael Conley, Lot 2, Gunning Point Road, Falmouth, for permission to construct a 4-bedroom, single-family house with attached garage, deck with stairs, porch, front landing and stairs, to install a Title V sewage disposal system, a 10-foot by 22-foot structural concrete slab, 4 inches thick, with World Wrestling Federation, dry wells, outdoor shower, AC units, utilities, driveway, connect to town water and associated clearing, excavating, grading, and landscaping. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'll have, save any of my comments until after Tom's presentation.
Good evening, Tom.
Good evening. My name is Tom Bunker, DSS Design, representing Michael and Linda Connolly at this hearing. You could say we no longer have the WWF on this plan. You don't have to worry about large men in costumes coming in or anything.
All right, well, I always thought that was World Wildlife,
Oh, World Wildlife Federation, okay.
but it was all my fellow commissioners who thought it was World Wrestling Federation.
I'll point out on this GIS map the location of the project. You're on Gunnington Road. On the east side of Flume Pond, and I'll outline it here. We have a large lot, that's lot 2, 85,000 plus square feet of land. It's vacant. What we're proposing is a house up in this location here. I'd like to point out some of the conditions here. This lot here, from here out, is more than 1,100 feet from Buzzards Bay into there, across Flume Pond. The pond is in a velocity zone. There's some velocity zone that comes inland there. But I can point out that it's not subject to tidal action. This pond is not a tidal pond. The shoreline of the pond is not subject to tidal action, nor does it have daily wave action. It is not subject to any of the winter or summer storms that plague the shoreline of Buzzards Bay. I know there was a recent case up here. This is a very different location than what you've been talking about recently. I feel that this site here has this velocity zone that's through here truly has just a 1% chance of happening. There's waves getting anywhere in here, just a 1% chance of happening in any given year. That's the definition of a 100-year storm, a 1% chance on any given year. Other velocity zones, which are more exposed, are subject to nearly constant tidal and wave action and storm. It's probably this afternoon. There's a lot of waves coming out here attacking these coastal banks, but not on Flume Pond. This site, all around this pond, is heavily vegetated with shrubs and trees, as opposed to other sites. I want to show you the site plan. There's the enlarged site plan. Flume Pond down here, bordering vegetated wetland here, and there's an isolated wetland over here also. We're going to get at this area here, below the limit of work, all here, there's 118 trees just in this area that we show on this plan. And they're all going to stay. That's below the limit of work. So we have 85,400 square feet of land, as I showed you there. 46,400 of it is upland, 39,000 is wetland. As I said, the pond is in the velocity zone up to this line here, V15 elevation 16, and there's an A zone, A12 elevation 15 that runs up to this dashed line I put on here is the A zone. And then the Falmouth Wetland Regulations has a 25-foot velocity zone. They put along the edge of all the velocity zones, 25 feet further landward than the FEMA velocity zone. Some of this land is steep enough to be considered a coastal bank. As you can see, this orange shading, it's fragmented. There's some here, some there. Some is down into the FEMA velocity zone, some is not. This part here is only touched by this Falmouth Wetland Regulations velocity zone. This part of the bank does not extend above the Falmouth wetland. It's just kind of all over the place. This is a very subtle, walking out here you'd not think it's a coastal bank. It's very subtle. Steeper than 10 to 1. The steepest part of it, I believe, took some sections here. We have the pond, wetland. Here we have 15 to 1, not a coastal bank. Then there's a little bit right in here, 6.8, 6.9 to 1 through this location. And likewise, there's a little bit of coastal bank down here. The FEMA V zone comes here, then there's a 25-foot Falmouth wetland regulation V zone. The A zone comes up to elevation 15 at this location. So this coastal bank can go no higher than the A flood zone right here. This is profile number 1 coming out this way to the pond. Profile 2 through the house coming out here. Similar, the bank, as shown on the other plan, stops further downhill. Stops within the Falmouth velocity zone. On both of these, I show a 50-foot buffer to the bank in the velocity zone.
Tom, can you repeat that orange part you have on there? That's your,
That's the coastal bank,
okay.
as of this,
Yep, the
this
orange.
orange part. The sections have gone down through this way, and the other one is, down through this way
Yep.
somewhat. So none of the coastal bank is even approaching 4 to 1. Definitely none of the coastal bank is steeper than 4 to 1. The septic system is up in the front yard, 10 feet back, as close to the street line as it can be, 10 feet. The house is, again, as close as we can make it to the septic system. There are actually some places where some of the house in the front has to be up on piles because there's no setback from a septic system to pile foundation. So we have a 20-foot setback from the leaching area, and through the middle of, or through, back from the front of the house, there is a foundation wall, and that is to make it keep it 20 feet from the leaching area of the septic system here. And likewise on the slab, only has to be 10 feet from the septic leaching area here, and the front 2 feet of it would be some preformed concrete slabs on piers to get the full depth of the garage. So we've gone to some extremes to get this house as close to the road as we can in this way. This limit of work here, as I showed you on the profile, we have a 50-foot setback from the coastal bank in the velocity zones. We have some of this area right here, a little bit here. This bank is not in the velocity zone. So we have a 50-foot setback right here. It's configured to fit in there. There's a corner mitered off of it. This goes down to about 7 or 8 foot limit of work right in through here. We feel that's adequate. This is where the lot is going down in elevation. So if we're putting in this foundation right here, you only need a 4.5 foot deep hole for the foundation right here. And it's only at a corner. This area here, the deck, there's no foundation being dug for it. It'll be on pilings. Likewise with this screen porch, it's a piling supported screen porch. So this whole system here does not require deep excavation, and frankly, some of the concern for the 10-foot minimum limit of work is to put up a ladder to reach up higher or whatever. But when you have a deck there, a ladder to get up onto the upper floors will be placed on the deck. And this screen porch is 10 feet down here from the limit of work, and this is more than 10 feet and more from the limit of work here. So some other thing, we have steps coming down from the deck that are a little closer than 10 feet, and then we have steps going down further to the basement level. None of this house, as you can see, is in the any flood zone. That's elevation 15 the house is up at around elevation 18, 19, or so. That's the 18-foot contour right through there. So we're more than 3 feet above the flood zone right there. We have the dry wells. All of the roof runoff will be directed into dry wells and infiltrated, so they will not go down the bank. The septic system, as we have here, is less than 100 feet to the coastal bank. State requires only 50 feet to the coastal bank, and that was to avoid breakout of any effluent. And I think, obviously, in the case of that breakout, I don't think they were considering a 10-to-1 coastal bank. It was more of a 4-to-1 coastal bank. This location here, 80, I think about 85 feet from the coastal bank at this one point. The soil here requires a strip out down 17 feet. The effluent in this system will not travel laterally at all. It will go down, naturally go down through, it has to be stripped out and sand put back in. It'll go down through that sand column, almost down. The naturally occurring sand is almost down at the level of the groundwater. So actually, this system will act as a system anywhere else where there's sandy soil. It'll just go down. By the time it gets down to that point, it's around elevation 5. The bottom of this coastal bank around elevation 8.5, 9. That means any of that effluent is going to go pretty much straight down to below, have no chance of breakout, and certainly no effect on the coastal bank itself. And much of this system is more than 100 feet. When it gets down there, if the water is presumed, we didn't do a hydrogeological study, if the water is presumed to flow in this direction toward the pond, as I showed in the profile, there's a large flat area of freshwater wetland with many trees and shrubs that have all the roots going down into that soil layer, which can act as a sponge for some of the nutrients which are going through there. I've also submitted the Cape Cod Commission nitrogen loading calculation to show that because of the large size of this lot, almost 2 acres, and I've included lawn across the front and around the house in there. It comes out to less than 5 parts per million of nitrate concentration. So, and I've been told that they'll be offering denitrifying, is that correct? A denitrification system, which will further protect the interests of the pond, and frankly, the bank. I'm not sure why it's written this way. I mean, certainly this septic system can have no effect on the coastal bank. But certainly with the denitrification system, it should have little to no effect on the environment of Flume Pond either. That's my presentation of the project. If Bob has some comments to make about this also.
Okay. Good evening, Bob.
Good evening, Betsy, members of the board. I'm Bob Ament, attorney for the Connollys, and I just have a few things to say and to submit. We know that one issue that has come up recently before the board is the measurement of the 50-foot setback when you have a coastal bank that is in the velocity zone. And the question's been raised whether that 50 feet begins at the point of the coastal bank that's in fact in the velocity zone, or whether the regulation means something different than what we think is the plain language of the regulation, whether you would measure the 50 feet from the top of the coastal bank, which would be outside the velocity zone and maybe a significant distance from the velocity zone. So we have, just to give you some case law decisions of the Supreme Judicial Court that really concern the interpretation of statutes and the requirement to read statutes according to their plain meaning and not to introduce additional words into a statute to get a different result than appears on the face of the statute. So there is case law on that, and we're going to submit you the cases themselves. In addition, the Connollys engaged Jim O'Connell, who I think is known to the Commission, but Mr. O'Connell was for, I think, 15 years with Coastal Zone Management and has held a number of positions in local, state, and federal coastal regulation. He's very familiar with the writing and interpretation of regulations. He's reviewed this case. He's visited the site. He's prepared a letter about his interpretation of the regulation. He agrees that the only proper way to read this particular regulation is that the 50 feet would be measured from the point actually in the velocity zone where, which is also the highest point in the velocity zone of a coastal bank, not from a point that's outside the velocity zone. And then, as I said, we know that you've been considering another case that involved some issues. That's the billing case at 57 Gunning Point Avenue. And so we just wanted to point out a few of the distinctions from that case. The Billings project proposed structure 13 feet away from the top of the coastal bank. In fact, there were 3 points in that case that were within 17 feet of the top of the coastal bank. And in this case, the closest point of the structure will be 35 feet away from the top of the coastal bank. And the limit of work, which in the Billings case was really right at the top of the coastal bank, in this case will be 25 feet, over 25 feet slightly, from the coastal bank. And that, of course, in this case means from the A zone. The entire work area, unlike the billing case, in this case, the entire limit of work area is in C zone. There's no A zone at all in that area. And this lot and the velocity zone on it face Flume Pond. It really, as Tom said, and that's a different condition than in the Billings case where the lot really fronts on Buzzards Bay. The entire resource area, the flood zone, both the A zone and the velocity zone, and the entire coastal bank in this case, is naturally vegetated, densely vegetated. Tom counted the number of trees. He's only counting trees, I think, that are 4 inches in diameter and more. So it's an area that is, vegetated in a very different way, and in a way that's very protective of the coastal bank. And there'll be no alteration of any of that area, not of any area that's even within 25 feet of the A zone or from the top of the coastal bank, which is the same point. So we think that it's important to distinguish the Billings case. I think I've shown that it can easily be done so, but I did want to submit to you, just for the record in this case, some information about the Billings case, including the plan and the NOI narrative and LEC Environmental Consultants Report that's from that file, just so it's part of this file. So I want to submit to you then just the things I've said, referred to, and the letter, including the letter from Jim O'Connell. So let me just do that. And you can distribute them if you want to among the members.
Give one to
I
Jen.
have copies for all of you.
We'll share that.
There are
Give one
5
to Jen.
copies. Thank you. And one for Jen. And this is Mr. O'Connell's letter, and I have plenty of copies of that too for you. I think 6 copies. Here's another one here. I don't know why when our copier...
Go on.
As Tom said, the Connollys are willing to install a denitrification system. It doesn't seem that under the regulations it should be necessary, where the calculations are less than 5 parts per million. But the Connollys are familiar with denitrification systems. They have one. They are willing to do it if that would help the commission to approve this project. So although we've not submitted anything that says that, if that's a condition of your, if you think that's a wise thing to do, a condition of your approval, that would be fine. You may have questions. I may have some further comments, but otherwise I'm done for now.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jen?
Yes, first off, I do respectfully disagree with Tom Bunker and Attorney Ahmed's reading of the regulation. This board has always measured the setbacks from the top of the coastal bank from the top of the coastal bank, not that portion of the coastal bank that falls in a particular flood zone. I spoke to Tom and Bob about this issue back at the beginning of March, before your very first hearing. So I'm a little, first hearing was March 12th, and you continued it. And I know I spoke to you and Tom prior to that, so I'm really kind of discouraged, Bob, that you chose till tonight to address the concerns I raised over 3 weeks ago with case law. So I would say that I would like our town council to review your submitted case law on this, especially since you said that the plain language of the law, and in your letter submitted to us Monday, you inserted additional language into our regulation to prove your case. So I just want our council to review this. Second, as far as Mr. O'Connell's letter is concerned, yes, this board is very familiar with Mr. O'Connell, has the utmost respect for Mr. O'Connell. But I do also need to clear with our council whether it's not as appropriate for Mr. O'Connell to submit something to this board, given that his recently working with them, and that's just something I want to clear with Pat or Frank on the appropriateness of him representing a client before this board. That's all. It's just an ethics thing. I just need to make sure that that's okay. I know it's happened before. I know other consultants have inquired of whether or not it can be done. It may quite possibly be okay. It's just something I need to check.
Yep.
That said, again, the board has always measured the top of the coastal bank from the landward most edge of the resource area. And if you read the regulation like you always have, the house does encroach into your no-touch buffer of the 50 feet from the top of the coastal bank. That said, I think Tom's done a great job showing the fragmentation of the bank, showing the bank on the landscape being inland from salt pond, this salt pond. I have seen this pond breach. I have spectacular photos of it, actually. This is the one, yeah, this is the one that breached during the December 9th storm. Way back when, or am I?
I think it was the next
Paul,
pond up.
Tom, can you?
It's the next pond up.
It was the next pond up, okay.
I
It
think
was the next pond up,
to the
yeah,
north.
okay, sorry. So I think, Tom, I have one question. The property to the east, where does the bank go on that?
Well, I didn't delineate it all through there.
Is there a possibility you could?
I certainly could.
Okay. It might be helpful just to see how this bank falls on the landscape. But I am pleased to see that the colored version, it was much easier to kind of get a grasp of what's going on out there. It is different from the Billings case. The Billings case was a different scenario, a different type of bank with different functions. So the board should also look at, always the interest that these resource areas provide. But that said, Bob, I do need to have Pat look at this or council look at this. And next time, if you could get it to us before 8:30 at the night of hearing, it would be appreciated. So we won't have to have a continuance to have someone review this. Those are my only comments.
I have some comments, but I'll save mine until my fellow commissioners have some.
So,
Oh, and one other thing, Tom, I'm going to need that board and the other board you have for the record. Okay? Thank you.
so as we're looking at a couple of regulations here. We're looking at 10.18, something or other, section 4A. It says non-eroding coastal banks, not in a velocity zone and not adjacent to other wetland resources, defined in 10.021A through E.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, according to you.
Okay, and so the top of the coastal bank is not in the flood zone.
Correct.
So let me understand something. So I'm not sure I understand this, because it seems to me that if the top of the coastal bank is outside of the flood zone, then it would fall under the 25-foot rule. That's what you're saying. Is that correct, Mr. Ahmed?
No,
No.
that's not what I'm saying.
That's right, although my understanding there'd be a question of whether there is in fact any buffer, but even if it was a 20-foot buffer, as opposed to no buffer required in that instance, we're meeting it.
I'm just talking about...
All wetland resources,
Courtney,
wait a second, Courtney, all
Wait,
wetland
no.
resources have buffers. All wetland resources
Well, I mean, you
have
just
buffers,
agreed
and the
with
buffers
Courtney, but the
are,
letter you sent the other day says something entirely different.
I'm just trying to understand where...
Well, I don't want to raise an issue that we don't have to get into, because indeed there is a 25-foot undisturbed buffer from the top of the coastal bank in this case.
Courtney, the coastal bank, the regulation that governs this project is the coastal bank in a velocity zone. Your regulations say that there is a 50-foot setback from a coastal bank in a velocity zone. This board has always looked at that setback from the top of the coastal
well,
bank.
that's what a buffer is. Buffer
Yes,
goes
a
from the
buffer,
landmost point of the resource.
What Tom and Bob are arguing is that 50-foot setback should be from that portion of the coastal bank that's in the velocity zone and not the top of the coastal bank. That's your top of the coastal bank.
So
This
I'm
is
trying
your-
to understand the 25-foot rule. Then.
It's not 25, it's 50.
It says the offset from it, this is a non-eroding coastal bank.
That's,
It's a
in a
non-eroding
velocity
coastal
zone.
bank in a velocity zone,
That's
Courtney.
the way I read it. And I'm saying it's...
In a
my view,
velocity zone,
This is a
Courtney.
non-eroding coastal bank. It's outside of the velocity zone. So in my mind, the buffer should be 25 feet, no touch zone.
Okay, so that's
That's how
That's
I
what you're
read the
saying is-
regulations.
Well, you're saying that you think that the top of that coastal bank, that setback should be measured from the coastal bank, that portion of a coastal bank in a velocity zone. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm saying that's never how this board has ever looked at that regulation, and that's fine, you guys can
And
look
that's
at
fine, but then show me a.
You know,
show me an
Tom,
example.
Tom,
Billings.
I think you should continue to make an argument for the function of a fragmented coastal bank. Overcoming the presumptions,
Like I said, Tom, it was really telling that.
that would be a
the
much
orange
better
plan we put
argument
up-
for you to make than try to rewrite our regulations.
Well, of course, we're not trying to rewrite the regulations.
No, what you
You're
want to
trying to
do is make
interpret
an
them.
argument that your project fits within the regulations because you can overcome the presumption of the function of this coastal bank. And if you can that's what you want to do, don't you?
That's what we could do. That's not what we have done, and whether we do this other or not,
Wouldn't you rather do that?
as I mentioned, as far as that,
System bank.
Yes.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Okay, so that's what you're going on. Not on
No.
Okay.
whether we successfully make that argument or not, I still feel that 50-foot setback from a coastal bank in a velocity zone does not say from the top of the very velocity zone, the part that's not in the velocity zone, I think as Courtney's seen, 50-foot setback from a coastal bank in a velocity zone would mean the coastal bank in the velocity zone. That's how the
I would
common
not go down
sense-
that road, Tom.
Well,
Definition is in critical characteristics and boundaries. Boundaries of the resource area buffer is the distance measured horizontally from the resource 100 feet landward of the resource. In the 1998 regulations for coastal bank, 10.30 something or other, A through something or other, there was a setback to that portion of a coastal bank in a velocity zone. It was clearly stated, there was no adding language in, it was clearly stated that that setback was to be from that portion of the bank in a velocity zone, and it defined that. When the bank regulations were redone in '08, that provision was removed. And the provision says, from the top of a coastal bank, the setbacks go from the top of the coastal bank. That's the way this board has always interpreted it since we rewrote them, and that is the staff's job to keep the board very consistent
And that's how we're gonna interpret them.
remind them how they
But-
vote their regulations.
But Tom, you have the floor, and this is not a coastal bank that goes across the whole area. It's a fragmented coastal bank.
this is, as I pointed out, a fragmented coastal bank. As I pointed out in my introduction, it's a very shallow coastal bank, it's fragmented. It is not subject to wave action, continued wave action or tidal action. There's a very low chance of ever meeting with such a fate or being subject to extreme wave action. Highly vegetated with numerous large trees, which do an excellent job of holding the soil, and it is not anywhere near a sediment source for any other downstream
Beaches
beach,
and
or those things. And frankly, as far as wildlife habitat, I'd say this habitat is no different from a landform which is flatter than 10 to 1. I'd say this coastal bank, like you might have some coastal banks where birds nest in cliffs and things like that.
Right, it's not one of those banks.
This is not one of those banks. There's no special habitat, wildlife habitat associated with this bank. And actually, the vegetative habitat is very similar to just normal, non-coastal bank landforms, as opposed to rocky, sandy, eroding coastal banks. I feel that this really has very little performance characteristics of what would typically be considered a coastal bank.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
think Tom's done a great job of answering your question. I just want to add one thing about it, and that is that the coastal bank in question, that is the one with this profile, because this one is so far away, that doesn't even begin to be a coastal bank until it's outside the FEMA velocity zone. It only begins about, it's 17 or 18 feet into the 25-foot zone here. So it's, the extent to which it would retain water is extremely limited and extremely rare. That assumes a storm events that 1 in 100 chance, even above the FEMA velocity zone. So I just would add that. You know, our job, that is Tom's job and my job, is to help our client get the result that they want, which is to be able to build a house on this lot. And we have no interest in making arguments that the commission has a difficulty with that are unnecessary to a case. There's no question that we understand your position, Betsy, and your understanding of that particular 50-foot regulation and where the 50-foot would be measured from. I don't know if that is the entire commission's opinion, and I don't think that we can interpret a statute or are charged with interpreting a statute by looking back to previous regulations. We have to look at the plain language of the today's regulation, and it's pretty simple. And you know, you measure 50 feet from a coastal bank that is in the velocity zone, and we think it is, there is a way to say what you think it means, and that would be to say 50 feet from the top of a coastal bank, any portion of which is in the velocity zone. And that's the language that I added in explaining, not adding it to get to our interpretation. That's the language that you would need to interpret the bylaw the way you're proposing to interpret it. And the result of interpreting that way really can lead to results that don't make sense and aren't reasonable. And I'd like to try my hand at just sketching something and showing you why I think that's the case.
I don't think this is necessary.
Well, okay, then I won't do it. Because I
case.
really think we're perfectly happy if you go the way you've indicated you're going, and I think we've probably, without my sketching something for you, provided the information you need to make a decision on this, if you need it, think it's necessary. And if you don't think it's necessary to accept our position, and you can grant this case the approval without it, well, we're delighted.
Well, I'd like, nobody's talked about, all the engineers and builders on this board have talked about anything about the construction, any questions you might have about the construction. Mike?
If you take a look at the footprint of the house and take an interpretation of the top of the bank, taking from 50 feet from the top, you have maybe 8 trees that are within the proposed construction. If you take the 50 feet and for a moment just draw that zone from
50
your
feet from
top
the
of
very
bank
top?
up,
Right.
yeah, and run it through the house, you have,
If you're talking about 50 feet from the very top of the A
yeah,
zone.
yeah, there you go.
It
And
cuts through
you've
the
got,
middle of the
and I
house.
did a head count by yours, and you've got something like,
Might be more on that.
There's one, well, between the limit of work that we show
Yeah.
and the new other
It
limit of
doesn't go
work,
the whole way.
uh,
Coastal Bank is only from here to here.
a dozen or so. Is that right, between our proposed limit of work?
And there is. So if there was some provisions for replacing those trees or lighting in kind, or doing something, and it seems a little pushing it to me because you get so much vegetation down in the truss. I was, quite frankly, lost walking down the slope. I couldn't tell you if I was on a bank or not.
Well, I think this would be a case where, there is no disruption of the, okay, I was going to say there's no disturbance in the A zone, and I was going to say also in the zone A of the 100-foot buffer, but if we're measuring that from that top of the coastal bank, then and that's where the A zone is, then yes, we would want it.
There is a discussion over what is the buffer and where it stops.
Yeah, but I don't know,
I'm taking a look at.
I hear what you're saying. Is there any area where you could plant trees?
There is, I think, left over from when this house was built. There's a little corner, there's sort of some lawn area here on the lot.
So there is something that, and clearly I don't think you need as caliper inch for caliper inch, because we have so many trees below. But I'm just saying that if under that.
I mean, if you look at probably the overhang of these trees, keeping with the standards of planting a new tree outside the drip zone, it probably couldn't get much in there except perhaps one tree that could help mark, that, what should be the no disturbance zone, measuring 50 feet from the V zone, up in this area right here.
The second issue is that Plume Pond is fresh water, correct?
It's generally freshwater. It's not the one that's breached. It could have been breached from time to time.
It gets overwashed sometimes.
It could get overwashed, but I mean, it'll flush out and the salinity will go down, but it's generally, I'm sure that the surrounding wetlands are freshwater wetlands, but there's probably some.
The freshwater, where I'm coming from, and I'll come back, but the freshwater pond is typically phosphate limited as opposed to nitrogen. And if that is fresh water, then I think the Title V is probably more than adequate. Whereas if you have some questions as to whether there is salt, the nitrogen could be the driving factor. So
phosphates are the critical nutrient
in a freshwater system.
I mean, we
and
do
that being
75 feet or so of fresh water.
The separation is, I think it's fine. That's not my question. And the question is are we worried about nutrients in Plume Pond now? That's my. If it's fresh water, that we're not, and if it is, we could be. So I guess
That's something we can discuss in deliberation.
that we can discuss. That's fine. And then I'll turn it over to my builder friends to worry about the foundation.
Courtney?
Do we have some preliminary architectures that show cross-sections and foundations and things?
They haven't been developed to that extent yet, have they? I mean, well, no, not in the flood zone, but.
They have not been developed to that extent at this time. If the commission wants me to fast-track that, of course.
Why doesn't Courtney do that? Why do you need that, Courtney?
I just want to see how it relates and what's going to be done here in the excavation and.
I mean, that's not, you wouldn't normally ask that on a project.
I will say occasionally you do ask for architecturals.
Yeah.
Usually there's a specific reason.
Yeah, we'd need an architecture if we were concerned about the trees and other things in place.
Or you're concerned about, erosion runoff. You've got a slope there. This is being built on the highest point on the lot. And it's sloping toward a coastal bank and a flood zone and.
It's a pretty shallow slope and it's very well vegetated.
Right.
So, but isn't it, it's As a matter of fact, I think one of our submission requirements is architectural drawings.
We hardly ever have. We have
We don't
architecturals
always
for
require them,
specific
but
reasons.
we reserve the right.
When you need to,
You reserve the right to request architecturals. They are not an absolute requirement like Tom's PLS stamp is on a plan. But this board does reserve the right to request architecturals when they feel it'll help you make a decision.
What's the distance between, what's the offset, the closest point of your work area to the building?
5 feet.
Seven feet.
The closest point is that corner of the deck right there,
Right.
which is, I have to count the thickness of the hay bale is about 6 feet.
Tom?
Yes?
Shouldn't that be marked?
It's enough to give a bobcat
Staff's gonna say
room.
that I hate seeing limits of work that are less than 10 feet. I was gonna let that one go. You had enough to overcome.
It's a deck
No.
up- I
In
mean,
the
it's a deck up this
future,
high.
please,
The other
and my,
question I have, and
is to let them get around and work in a comfortable way.
And this is really more a building department thing, but it might come roaring into us as an amendment. The shower you have is closer than 10 feet to the sideline. Is the building department doesn't have a heart attack about that?
It's generally not considered, it was not attached to the house, sometimes even it is, but I mean, it's not attached to the house, not a structure. I mean, if it's a matter of 4-foot pieces of fence or 3 in a door, not considered a structure typically.
Tom, what's your take on that?
Me?
You're the.
I got some other things first. I'm not too worried about a shower.
Well, I know you're not, I'm saying, is that a building department issue?
Sure.
A zoning issue?
Yep, let them have it. That sounds like a plan.
it's not
With
even in
us.
our jurisdiction.
Well, it could well become in our jurisdiction when they come back in an amendment and say, we gotta put it
Don't try to
somewhere
put the
else.
shower in the back of the house if this house is approved.
I mean, there's room for it. But anyway, that's enough. The other point I would make going
It's
back to this.
not within 100 feet of
question
the top of any coastal
the,
bank. It's not in our jurisdiction. It's not
Okay,
land
fine.
subject to coastal
Fair
storm
enough.
flowage. It's not within
All right,
Betsy,
100 feet of a coastal
On to
bank.
another point. And that is that in further reading of this thing, on the buffer from a bank, it's pretty clear now that I've followed through on this, and so is that there's a 10.18, whatever it is, I've lost it now. Oh, here it is, 10.18, non-eroding coastal banks and velocity zone, and here, I should have read on, and not adjacent to other wetland resources, and they list them all, is 25 feet. And so there are all kinds of other resources that this is adjacent to,
Actually, this is not
I
adjacent.
think that's where the issue comes in my mind.
This bank is not adjacent to other resource areas.
Read the resources, and it's pretty clear to me they're
Land
involved.
subject to coastal storm flowage?
Yeah, it's land.
It is a resource area.
No, but that's not one of the resource areas. That is not one of the resource, if it's 100 feet, it can be, it wouldn't be a coastal bank if it weren't in land subject to coastal
No, I
storm
understand
flowage.
that.
The 100 feet is from other resources other than
Oh, yeah, okay.
buffers. So is this coastal bank 100 feet from the BBW?
It doesn't matter, because actually the first sentence in that regulation, it is.
We have a setback from this anyway.
That's to the
but-
house.
So it's not in coastal banks, not in the velocity zone with a slope greater than 4:1. It's not greater than 4:1. So it doesn't meet this regulation.
Yeah, and I thought you did an excellent job
Okay,
saying,
the question was coming up about.
yeah, but I thought you did an excellent job.
We will obviously deliberate on this.
Do you need to get information? I'll come back to them. From Pat and Frank? I don't need information from them.
I'd like to submit, if the board does not feel they need the information, that's fine. But on that, I will make a comment that this is the third time we've seen Attorney Ahmed submit something to this record at a hearing when they have had ample time to submit it prior to that. And stuff that requires additional thought and review, that the staff has not had time to review, the commission has not had time to review, and I think it is absolutely disrespectful to do that to this commission. Enough said. And as far as checking on the issue with the submittal from Mr. O'Connell, that is something I just think it's appropriate to check.
Yeah, I
know
think
in
we
the
should check that.
past, other consultants that have either worked for this board, that have been asked to appear before this board, have checked with their own counsels. Like I said, it may absolutely be fine, but I think it's prudent to check.
Yeah, I think you should check too, before we
The other
have
issue
Jim.
is we typically ask for stuff to be submitted to us a week in advance.
Yes, you do actually request things to be submitted a week in advance, and this clearly was not.
So, you know, and we can close it and disregard what's been submitted.
Well, how about if I comment on that?
Okay. We're not done asking questions, though. All right?
Well, of course.
Tom?
A couple little things, Tom Bunker. I don't see a drywall detail, right? And you have a number of them proposed. So I think that would be prudent to have that on there. And for the, Madam Chair, through the chair, the gentleman that spoke earlier, do you need his name?
For the record, I'm Mr. Conley. I own the property in question, and in actuality, I'd like to go, I'd just like to say...
Sir?
If you have any further comment,
You
you'd have to go up.
sir, sorry.
You even have to repeat what you just said into the microphone.
My name is Michael Conley. My principal residence is on Gunning Point. I am in physical therapy for a dead leg, and once the physical therapy ends, I'll be living on Gunning Point full-time. Number two, I would like to point out, I'd just like to grab a quote from a Latin poet that goes as follows, and that is, I think it's Ovid, it could be Plutarch, but it goes something to the effect that, say nothing and be thought a fool, speak and remove all doubt.
And are you going to speak for him?
Well, I just want to say, I come into town and I look for the very best people I can find on every level, and I always go back to the 22 years I spent at the State House, along with my close friend Eric Turkington, and the environmental issues we dealt with in Boston, and we're very respectful of the environment here in Falmouth. But that said, you know, whether it's Tom Bunker or Robert Ahmed, those people are chosen very carefully, and consistent with that, Mr. O'Connell was chosen very carefully. The only thing was we had real-time problems with Mr. O'Connell in terms of he couldn't be here tonight. He was extremely busy, and it was a rush order just getting that letter to you today, and we had no disrespect to pay the commission. I do want to just take in terms of a couple of notes, and that is, I've sat with all the neighbors, laid out the plans with them. And when I say all the neighbors, I'm talking about, there are 4 neighbors. There's the immediate neighbor, Scott Peterson, who lives right next door. Then across the street is Lori Sunderson. And then there's Dr. Chrisman here. Then there's the Shelton is here. In fact, Charlie Shelton is over here. I sat with each of them, laid out the plans at length, explained to them what I wanted to do, and all 4 said they fully endorse it. George Chrisman doesn't like to stay out late. He said he'd send a letter. Scott said he'd send a letter. Charlie Shelton said he'd come himself to support us, and Lori Sunderson said she's with us, but she didn't volunteer to write a letter or anything of that nature. So I just want to know it. I didn't go with the 300 committee because I really don't know the people on the 300 committee. Just to make sure that we touched all the bases and we didn't offend anybody in the process, try and hide anything from anybody. Consistent with that, we're here. I understand we have a disagreement over language, but the thing that I do get, and I go to one statement that was made, I was here for the Billings appeal on the variance. I sat through the entire night. I took copious notes, sat with my wife. But the thing that I was most struck by in that evening was, just before we closed, Ms. McKay, just before Vice Chairman Corvo called the question, closed the meeting, Jen McKay, in relation to Attorney Wall, this was just minutes before it closed. Mr. Wall made an assertion, and Jen McKay came back and said, look, we work with these rules and regs. We aren't inflexible people. You can correct me in terms of, not trying to be verbatim, but the thrust of it was, the commission works with everybody. We're not inflexible people. And the thing that I hear very loud and clear here tonight is that you may find a different basis than that which Mr. Rahman and Mr. Bunker put together in order to make the case that this ought to be buildable, that we ought to be able to build this house. And that's all we ask for. We just want that result. I do not. That house, this house that you look at right there, can't build that house. Just can't do that. It's not practical. I thank the commission. I thank you for hearing me out, and I thank you for hearing my people out. And at no point would we ever disrespect any of the boards or agencies of the town. Great respect for all of them, and we'll always have that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you.
Sir, we certainly will work with people who come before us, but we have to follow our regulations, just like the applicants have to follow the regulations. And it is true, as much as Tom and Bob work with the regulations, they don't work with the regulations as much as we do in terms of working through how to interpret them. That said, I think Tom did an excellent job in his presentation, and Bob as well, although I don't agree with some of Bob's interpretation. But it may be that we don't even have to go down that avenue.
We have confidence in you, Madam Chairman, as you do how hard it is.
As you, we would like to protect the environment. Bob, are you done?
Almost.
He only asked a drywall question. He had plenty on his things.
Well, no, I just...
He's going in the shower to Courtney.
When my fellow commissioner and I was just taking my pens and I take my Leatherman and I kind of scale things out. And it's a fragmented coastal bank that we're taking these measurements from that would protrude into the house. It's not completely like your orange line shown there.
It's only half the orange line.
Right. So when you did your tree count, did you?
It's like three
Right.
trees.
It's
That orange line will come down.
It's like three trees, Tom.
That's what I'm getting to.
And that can be conditioned.
It could be conditioned.
That can be conditioned.
Tom, it would look like that blue line, right? not spread
Yes,
across like
right,
that.
right.
I want,
But
yeah.
yeah, it would come, that's not necessarily the entire 50 feet.
That's the worst case.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
that's-
not even, it's not, it's just, I don't think it's correct, because that orange line would go across, then dip west, west, and then over. Tom,
Yeah, it's just
Tom is not presenting it as
Blue line.
in the best light possible,
the upper
but
blue
we
line on that.
understand it.
Yeah,
We,
okay. I didn't mean to confuse
this-
anything.
Blue line.
Yeah, this
So
is,
you see what they're.
actually, I misable, this is actually 50 feet plus the 10-foot work limit. This is actually 60 feet what I drew on.
10-foot work limit? Thank you,
Yeah.
Tom.
And now that we stepped in that,
To make the-
that can be confusing.
Thank you.
There's a reason for that, because it's all, that would put the house all up in flat, where then we would have to have an 8-foot dig, where coming down here, we
That's how
only
it
need a
should be
4-foot
conditioned.
dig. That's the reason.
And you know why I asked for a 10-foot limit of work, it's not to push your houses back even further, it's so that the contractors have the appropriate room to work when they're building these structures.
because there's a bunch of lunkheads that just don't pay attention. They always use it for leaning ladders on it, putting, they come out with a drywall bucket full of happy crap, and they dump it on that. And it's truly not an arbitrary number. It does serve
On purpose.
a purpose,
People are used to that.
I'm,
Right.
where it's not such a slope, I'm ready for the old-fashioned wooden snow fence again. It really is, sometimes you have to be that blunt. I'm not
Orange
particularly in this.
construction fence.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's the,
And it's thinner.
yep, and it's just something that you need that sometimes you really need to, what irritates me as of late, and I made a comment about it in here, and the contractor responded appropriately, is I went to a site, and I'm just really, even on my own sites, the company I work for, I'm a broken, it's just a broken record that I gotta repeat. Stay off the limit of work. Limit is the limit, and when you encroach on that, sometimes, I'm getting way-winded, sorry. You know what I'm saying.
You know what? We're going to move on to Russ, because he hasn't
Thank
had a
you.
chance to ask a question.
This is gonna be brief, believe me. I find a big difference between this project and the other side of Gunning Point Road.
Yes.
I have no problem with it, therefore I have no questions.
Do we
It's
need
up to
it?
the board.
Do we need any more information?
No.
Tom wants a drywall detail.
That can be conditioned.
You're right, correct.
I'll make a motion to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
I'll
Second.
second that.
Okay, any other questions on the board? Any questions from the audience? You sure you want to say something?
You're ahead. You're ahead right now.
Top of the night,
You might slip backwards.
Yeah, I do. I just want to say that
Briefly.
what you do is hard. What Jen does is hard. What we do is hard. This is not easy stuff. And a lot of it's like herding cats to get all the information that's needed. And if we don't always get things in as soon as we would like, it isn't for lack of trying, because we're dependent on getting things from other people. And sometimes we even make decisions late in the day that are late, like saying we can do denitrification. But the plans haven't changed. We didn't submit revised plans in this case. I submitted a couple of cases that buttress simply say you have to read things plainly. And Mr. O'Connell could have come here and made his report here, and nobody would have had a problem with his doing that.
Well,
So thanks.
actually, it's probably just as well Jim didn't come.
Yeah, it's fine, because I think now you can ignore that, you can ignore my cases, and maybe you can make the decision on the other issues that have been
Okay,
discussed.
just recognize that when material does come in like that, we may well ask for a continuance.
I understand
So we
that.
can,
I understand that.
all right, my advice to everyone is to wag more, bark less.
For the life of me, I couldn't remember that.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Saying that all week,
Well, that's what I say to Jen when
all week.
she calls me up 3 or 4 times a day when somebody's come into her
All
office.
week.
So there's a motion and a second on the table to close this hearing and take it under advisement. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Mr. Conley, hopefully there'll be no snow by the time you come to Falmouth.
We have one more, I think.
We have several more. We have Town of Falmouth Beach Department. Do we have a,
Oh, we got a
DEP
DEP number
number.
for that, and we told Mr. Hopper he did not have to attend tonight. Tom, do not take those plans out of this room. You need to dismantle them, fold them up, and give them to me, please. Thank you.
those were good presentations, Tom.
Either that,
Yes.
or you can drop them off tomorrow, Tom.
Motion to close the hearing and take it under advisement.
Is this the
Beach.
The beach committee?
Yep.
second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second to close Town of Falmouth Beach Department, Grand Avenue.
Yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, unanimous, so moved. Now, Raoul's been waiting very patiently here. Continued request to amend the existing order of conditions. John Bullman, Lot 160, Noshawn Circle, West Falmouth. Request to amend the existing order of conditions DEP number 253470 to change the house configuration, construct a pool shed, install a rear ground level patio, sitting wall, in-ground pool, and a concrete mechanical equipment pad. Jen?
Yes, Madam Chairman, this is being heard under an amendment. This amendment, this project was originally before the commission prior to your recent buffer regulations. At the last hearing, part of reviewing an amendment is to determine whether it is a minor, moderate, or significant change. If it's a significant change to the original design, the board just simply requires a new notice to be submitted for the proposed project.
Right.
Last week or 2 weeks ago, you felt that the proposal was a significant, increase in impervious surface to the original design and asked for the applicant's representative to go back and look at certain aspects of that and see if they could not address some of the board's concerns. And I believe they submitted revised plans. Whether or not the board still considers it a significant change, that said, I mean, and if you do consider it a significant change, the applicant would just file a new notice. You
Or
would have
file a
to
new
feel-
amendment?
Or reduce it even more and get it a little bit closer than what you originally proposed, but it was a big difference.
Raoul, are you going to be able to convince us that
In that, let me rephrase that.
this is an amendment
It,
worthy
it
project?
The applicant, the project needs to be either a minor or moderate change to the proposal in the way that it impacts the resource areas. You saw an amendment a few weeks ago that was a large expansion, but it was 100 feet away from the salt marsh. There wasn't any impact to your resource areas. This is right on the bank. And I really hope this bank is not in a velocity zone. Oh, look, yes it is.
But it's a non-eroding coastal
It's a
bank in a
non-eroding
velocity
coastal bank
zone.
in a velocity zone. So, that's how you need to review that. So look at the original proposal and determine whether or not the board feels it's minor, moderate, or significant.
And I'm sure Raul's going to convince us as to the
Give it his
original,
best shot.
I'm sure he will give us, we know he'll give us the best shot, but I'm sure you're going to give us the original impervious surface versus what you're asking for now, and you're not going to consider a gravel driveway as not impervious.
It is,
It is what?
it is considered as not impervious.
We consider it not impervious.
Part of the
Consider a
changes,
gravel driveway to be part of your impervious surface coverage because it's pervious surface that does not support natural vegetation. So when you're looking at your overall impervious coverage on a lot, you include pervious surfaces that don't support natural vegetation.
the new plans reduce the back patio as impervious is and remove the bituminous pavement to gravel surface. The back patio was reduced by approximately 630 square feet of impervious surfaces. Some of the other revisions that were done to this plan had to do with some of the comments from a neighbor in regards to the property line and having more screening, and having the limit of work to go down that property line to the east. Part of the lot coverage on the zoning notes that we were reviewing last week, we did reduce the total lot coverages by pavement, parking, and structures by removing the bituminous pavement to gravel surfaces. And it reduced from the number back then of 27% to 18.5%. Before that, I did hand this a couple of green cards that we received in the past 3 weeks since the hearing we had 3 weeks ago. One of them was never picked up, so I just had to hand them in. The other ones were submitted before then. An additional change to the plan was there was a question about what was shown originally as a flat area in this section, whether or not stormwater can overcome this ridge. So we turned on some of the side shots from the survey, and it clearly shows that the elevations in this considered flat area is still a ridge. Even though we don't have a contour crossing it, it is still a ridge.
Still higher.
So that runoff from this development, it's not going over onto the bank. We still left the proposed drainage system as we had it before, with the understanding with a gravel surface, we do get less runoff into this drainage system. And those were the only changes we did, just patio reduction in impervious and replacement of gravel surface for bituminous pavement. Another change, I think Tom was the one asking for this. We do show the pool fence, and we did move the sitting wall further away from the limit of work sill fence. We replaced portion of the limit of work back to hay bales, only for this section around the construction for the septic system.
Do you have any
And,
cut and fill calcs for this project?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Cut and fill calcs for this? You're going to have to dig out a lot, aren't you?
We do not have calculations of the cutting and fills. There is a lot of cut.
Well, with the topographer, you're either going to cut
There-
out or
there is a
you're
lot
going
of
to
cut.
add a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cut truck, and most of it is just going to be trucked out. There's no location in this site to fill. Everything's being cut out.
I think the board needs to look at what was originally proposed, so what the dotted line. Go from what was originally proposed to what's being proposed. No, excuse me. Raul, do you think you could send me the fill calcs by the end of
This
the
is a new
week?
project?
Even if they closed it, could you send me the cut and fill calcs?
this is
by the
this.
end?
I can do that.
Okay, just send me an email with that and I can forward it to the board.
Doesn't look like a minor addition.
And when I forward it to the board, I'll CC you, just so they know that, you know that what I'm sending them is what you send
It
me.
doesn't have anything over. This is the minimus here.
Just so they
Yeah,
have that
if
information
it was
during the
this,
deliberation.
But this isn't that big a deal, to be honest with you. This is.
Betsy, my blue doesn't show the limit of the driveway, the old driveway, because I couldn't figure it
Old
out.
driveway limit.
So you would need to add, you want a blue marker here, so you guys can kind of visualize it a little bit better, but
Is this the old
to be
driveway?
fair, I would
This
put
is-
the old
this
impervious,
is the-
old
this is the
driveway
old-
in there.
So that would, that's the proposed, that's this. So you're coming in,
So the garage, they're moving out.
This is-
This isn't gonna be garage now.
yeah, this is gonna be,
If we're comparing the original application from 2008, which is this plan over here,
that would've been.
you can project practically a rectangle
Yep,
all along this side
What was that?
of the project
driveway.
towards the road,
This is all the cut.
and then septic system on the back.
Oh, so
That-
that was all gonna be impervious surface?
This was all going to be impervious surface.
Correct, that's this
Oh, all right.
square, the
That's-
second.
All this was going to be impervious, which is
Yeah.
practically 95% of the width of the lot. And that's practically what we're maintaining here. We're adding now, with the revised plan, the sitting bench for the pool patio, the pool,
Yep.
and the plows.
I have enough information. Do you have enough
Wait a minute,
information?
well, is that one on the new proposal, the new one or the older one? No, oh, it's the newer one, got it.
And that was a reduction from what you came in with
No, I have a
last
couple
week?
questions.
Wow.
Okay.
And impervious surfaces, yes. This is the new one.
Impervious surfaces and pervious surfaces that don't support vegetation?
No.
What's that number? Always look at it that way. Look at gravel driveways and any surface that does not support vegetation as impervious, it just makes it so much easier.
The reduction on just the patio was 630 square feet.
I want, Betsy would like the difference in impervious and pervious surface that doesn't support natural vegetation between the original project back in 2007 and the proposal that you came in with tonight.
Tonight, yeah, that's the difference.
That's what I would like.
I do not
That's-
care about
yeah.
the proposal you came in with 2 weeks ago. And I don't, it's not that I don't care.
But see, he's a
It's-
stormwater engineer, so he brought his calculator with him. He's gonna give us that.
He's gonna try. He does not want to disappoint.
When he's done, your turn. Ask some questions.
Well, I do think this is the longest you've ever had to stand up at the podium before us. Usually it's quick.
From last week, we had a overall project lot coverage of 27.3%. We're down to 24.9.
What were we,
What was
The original,
We want
the
the
original
original.
proposal was 21.
And so you're at what now today?
24.9?
24.9, the original proposal was 21.
21.
Okay, so you're expanding it by 3% total lot coverage. So you look at lot coverage and we say it differently.
Right, the numbers I'm comparing is the zoning lot coverage,
Yeah,
which is not what you're looking at zoning lot coverage.
yeah, we're looking at
impervious
buffer.
/ pervious.
Development.
shows Vegetation from then and now. And if you want to email that calculation to me by the end of the week, I will send that as well to
I
them.
don't think it's significant. I think we're there.
Raoul? Russ has some questions.
Yes.
32.5 is the highest elevation on the lot, if that's what I'm seeing on the contour lines here?
There's a 33.4 behind this cluster of trees.
Over here.
And although we don't have shots or elevation shots on the neighbor,
Yep.
we do believe that still keeps going up.
Okay, I remember seeing that. And I'm curious, what is gonna be the final elevation for this pool deck?
29.5, we have a side shot, a proposed grade elevation just behind the house. 29.5.
Whose green is this? Oh, it's me.
Okay, right here. Okay, no further questions.
So you are gonna fill some.
This existing 32, we're cutting down to 29.5. There's existing 30. There's going to be some earth
gonna be a
movement. There's no
basement here?
question, there's no question there's going to be some earth movement around.
Basement?
The garage, it's at elevation 20.
Garage under.
Garage under.
Yeah, John.
Okay.
There's,
Oh, all right.
there's garage under on both this
The
side.
elevation of the house and pool is 29.5, correct?
Yes, the
Yes.
And the garage is
pool
gonna
deck
be
is at
under.
29.5.
29.5. The house is at 30.
You gotta step up into that.
Okay, all right.
Are you gonna drive down into the garage?
Yes.
No, the existing road is at 20.
Oh, so it's gonna be flat into the garage?
Right.
Essentially, yeah.
Yes.
Remember that?
From the existing road, this
is
lot
the
goes
time of year
up.
to think about all that. You don't wanna be going up or down.
Anybody have a
Want the shortest distance from your car to your road.
elastic over there?
Did
And you want the
I'm done.
garage pitched
I'm done.
towards out of
Courtney.
the house.
I'm done.
Courtney, question?
So, your proposal, this amendment, is going to, in your view, meet all the applicable regulations?
Right, based on the old regulation, we're protecting the buffer, protected area of 25 feet to the coastal bank on those regulation. We kept that approved limit of work. We kept the development on the same side of the project. It's the same size of number of bedrooms, same denitrifying septic system. We increased some benefits to the resources in adding drainage to the driveway, whereas the original design didn't have drainage for the driveway. We did have dry wells for the roof, but no drainage for the driveway. Even though it's going to be a gravel driveway, less runoff, we still have that catch basin and a leaching pit for it. We do have additional dry well for the pool whenever they have to empty it. And we did shift it, planting over here and limit of work in accordance to what we talked last time because of the neighbor's concern of the proximity to that property line. Those 3 trees on the right side or the east side will better define that property line for any concerns from the neighbor.
Okay. I have enough. Everybody have enough?
I have enough.
I do as well. I'll make a
Do you
motion to...
still want to see the cut and fill counts and the impervious/pervious difference? Because Raul can give me those calculations by the end of the week, and I can email them to you.
Okay, or we'll
Is
have
that
them for
gonna be
next week.
helpful for you?
We'll have them for next week.
You'll
when we
have them for
discuss
your
it.
deliberation.
Is the absolute
You do
basic
that?
question,
Okay.
is this a major or a minor change?
Okay.
Yeah, basically,
Did you make a
that's what
motion?
you're.
Yes, I did. I made a
Did
motion.
somebody make a second?
And if you say no,
I'll
then
second this.
you're not taking anything.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table to close this hearing and take it under advisement. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Thanks, Raul. This is you.
Harold?
Thank you.
Okay, continuing enforcement order
April 2nd.
is April 2nd.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Other business, vote proposed revisions, that will be April 2nd,
That will be
because
April 2nd.
had to go into the
because
paper
We did have to
twice.
make one slight correction in the public hearing, in the regulations. Courtney, here, hold those for me, please. In the regulations that appeared in the paper, so we did make that correction. Basically, there was a chunk of your land subject to coastal storm flowing regulations that was left out. So we just put that back in, that wasn't gonna change at all, it wasn't being revised. So we will vote those
Next
next week, and there's small formatting issues, but there's nothing that, the substantive part of the language and the regulations went in, and 2 weeks will be next week, and you'll have it done.
And have you gotten any
for town
comments from
meeting.
anybody?
I haven't heard from anybody, except for Jeff Johnson, but his comments were basically
We've already
the same
discussed those.
comments that Jeff.
Well, Jeff and Barbara
Barbara.
had commented,
Yeah,
and we discussed
they were the
those.
same, basically, comments. And Jeff pointed out a few small formatting things with like the numbers.
Okay. Okay, vote orders of conditions.
Next week.
Move to adjourn.
This, isn't that, lots 144 and 145, 174 Seapit Road.
Susan's growing.
Come on,
Thank you,
Susan.
Courtney.
Big breath. My only comment on
Big
this one
push at
is,
the end.
my comment on this one is some of the trees that are going to be saved are within the limit of work.
And so protect trees within limit of work that are to be saved. Other than that, is the board happy with the revision?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, I think they,
Yep.
I think,
Made a concerted effort to
They did.
address everything that we
They
had.
did.
They
I-
actually
they-
did, they came in with the footprint, they sat and spoke with me, they submitted things.
Yes.
It costs them more money to redo the septic system, so.
yeah. But it's going to be a better project.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, no, I may, but
Have all those nice
Happy with
trees
it.
that have grown up to protect
All right,
that nice
anything else?
part of the river.
All right, protect trees within limit of work, guys.
Motion
And
to,
that's very straightforward.
motion to accept the order as discussed.
second.
Any further comments, questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved. Who wants to
Motion to adjourn?
I'll second that.
One motion, 4 seconds.
There you go.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, so moved.